Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Delta Stewardship Council meeting. Today is Thursday, May 25th. Again, I want to welcome everybody. We are actually broadcasting from virtually. We are not in person pursuant to Government Section 11133. The members of the Delta Stewardship Council will be participating remotely from teleconferencing locations, and members of the public seeking to observe and address the council will be able to do so using the telephone or electronic public access information listed in the agenda. And the instructions will be given shortly. Again, I want to welcome everybody to today's meeting. And I would like to have Beck, if you would please help us establish a roll call.
Absolutely. Councilmember Burgess.
Here.
Councilmember Damrell.
Here.
Councilmember Waso.
Here.
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Smith. I'm so sorry. Councilmember Zingale.
Here.
Councilmember Manranian.
It's Maranian. Here.
Councilmember Chair Medueno.
Medueno here. Again, welcome everybody. If any member of the public is interested in providing public comment on any agenda item during today's meeting, please send an email to the clerk at engage@deltacouncil.ca.gov. We will be posting that on our screen here shortly. We will now move on to public comment. And again, this item is for the public to comment on any topic not on the council's agenda, and any comments on items on the agenda will be taken during that time. Beck, do we have any public comment?
No, Madam Chair, we do not.
Okay. We will now move on to the consent calendar. And for that, we have the adoption of the April 27th, 2023 meeting summary. Do I have a motion, or is there any discussion before we take a motion?
Madam Chair, I'll recuse myself from this vote since I was not there.
Okay.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Lee, a second by Councilmember Burgess. Beck, will you do roll call on that as well?
Councilmember Burgess.
Yes.
Councilmember Damrell.
Here.
Councilmember Waso. You're on mute.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Aye.
Councilmember Maranian.
I'll recuse myself.
Oh,
I
that's
was part of the meeting.
sorry. Councilmember Zingale.
Yes.
Chair Medueno.
Aye. Moving on to the next item, it is the chair's report. I have a few items, and I want to, as I'm struggling with our new technology meeting again, I'm not used to this. Want to highlight a couple of key things that happened over the last month. First, I want to acknowledge the attendance of the Aqua meeting that I was able to attend with our executive officer, Ms. Jessica Pearson. Great discussions, an opportunity to meet with water leaders from throughout the state of California. And for me as the chair, it's always an important aspect to attend these meetings and also highlight again the role of the Delta Stewardship Council, the work that we do, and to have those types of engagements and conversations. I'm going to tell you that 9 out of 10 times when I introduce myself, nobody knows about who I represent. And so it's great. I really want to say that it's been a pleasure to be able to attend some of these meetings and again, have some of those discussions. Also, and equally as important as hearing again some leading trends, obviously some of the highlights with regard to water policy happening, and hearing some of our stakeholders and water allies, such as Water Board Chair Joaquin Esquivel, and hearing his keynote address during one of the sessions. Moving on, I also had the opportunity to attend the Adaptive Management Forum, and I'm just going to say it was incredibly enlightening. I was so proud to have been a participant and also an attendee. And I want to thank Councilmember Diane Burgess, who gave the keynote address that morning. Again, Councilmember Burgess, your comments, your empathy, your background, and again, just your overall commitment, if you will, was incredibly well received. And again, want to thank you for your participation. I also want to thank members of the science program for putting that adaptive management forum together. I want to start with Dr. Dylan Chappell, who is our senior environmental scientist. I want to thank Dr. Stephen Elser, also a senior environmental scientist, Kyra Wallace, who is our state Sea Grant fellow in the administrative division, Andy Voong, who is our IT specialist. And then from our public participation unit, I want to thank Beck Barger and Erica, who again, just stellar in what they do. Also had the opportunity to attend the regional sand tour last Friday. This is a project in Elk Grove. And again, hearing this amazing project that has taken well over 10 years to bring to, or actually maybe 20 years to bring into existence. This $1.7 billion expansion treatment plant is going to remove somewhere upwards of like 30,000 pounds of ammonia that is and has been going into the Delta. And that's how our involvement got plugged into this project. Again, it's the second largest public works project in the nation and the largest public works project in this area. And again, the amount of ammonia, amount of, again, other nitrogen and other pathogens getting into the Delta is going to be averted as a result of this amazing project. And again, this is going to help to lessen the strain in the Delta with the decline in fisheries and the ecosystem. Our California EPA Secretary, Yana Garcia, was there, and she again also stressed the unique benefits of this project, helping farmers and ranches, I should say, with harvested water. And it's going to irrigate something like 16,000 acres of farmland, and again, helping to reduce groundwater pumping. So I was completely stoked to be a part of that. Yesterday and on Tuesday, I had the pleasure of attending the WELL graduation. WELL stands for Water Education for Latino Leaders. This is a statewide organization. They graduated upwards of 20 new graduates. These are all elected officials from, again, throughout the state of California, mostly city council, board of supervisor candidates, as well as some water district individuals. And we took a tour yesterday into the Delta. I had the pleasure of being able to address this group and again, talk about their importance of, again, getting to be more knowledgeable about the Delta, understanding the Delta, and making the introduction of, again, what the Delta Stewardship Council is and how they can be partners with us. And then lastly, I want to welcome back Councilmember Maria Maranian. Maria is no stranger to the Delta Stewardship Council. Maria actually served on the council before. She was actually an appointee of the Senate, and now she has been appointed by the state, the Speaker of the Assembly, I should say. A little bit about Maria, for those of you who don't know her. Maria is a resident of La Cañada. She is a managing partner of Cordoba Corporation. It's an infrastructure development firm based in Los Angeles. In addition to serving on the Delta Stewardship Council, she also served before on the Los Angeles Regional Water Quality Control Board. She's participated in numerous water policy panels. She's held numerous leadership positions for academic institutions such as Woodbury University, Cal Poly Pomona, and again, just a member of this council that, again, we welcome you, Maria, and we thank you again for your service and looking forward to the next round of leadership for yourself. And just want to also say thank you. I was invited to attend Maria's swearing in ceremony a couple weeks ago, and I was very pleased and very honored to have been part of that. And with that, that will conclude
Thank you.
my
Thank you, Madam
report.
Chair.
And
And
actually,
yeah.
yes, absolutely. Would love for you, Maria, if you would like to just make a few comments, if you will.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This was this council has been very, very dear to my heart. My career has been developed in public policy, transportation, and water over 30 years. And in the past, I have worked with the Speaker Rendon when he was working on the water bond, $20 billion water bond, and so we had working relationships. And I just want everybody to know that he really cares about this commission, this council. And he said that this is the year of Delta. This is the year that the South is going to be really wanting to have their input in overall policies that are made, and asked me to come back. I want to thank Madam Chair from you for doing such a great job. I really agree that people don't know enough sometimes about us in these big conferences, and your work in reaching out to everyone has paid off. I heard from the Wells individuals that you were there. So don't think that your work goes unnoticed. And putting us on the map is going to be an important issue. Converting, again, science to policy is one of the biggest things that we can do here. I want to thank the staff and all the board members that I know and the ones that I don't, which I hope that I'm going to go get to know. And thank you very much for the nice introduction, Madam Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you, Maria.
Of course.
Welcome back, Maria.
Thank you, Julie.
Great to see you
And
back,
with-
Maria.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you. All right. Well, that now actually officially concludes my chair report. Beck, is there any public comment?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Okay, moving on to item 6 for our executive officer's report. And for that, we have our executive officer, Ms. Jessica Pearson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maria, I want to also add my congratulations on your appointment. Welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Looking forward to working with you.
So along with the chair, I also had the opportunity to attend the ribbon cutting ceremony for the Echo Water Project. And that's the name for the Sacramento region's very impressive wastewater treatment plant, which, by the way, treats 130 million gallons of wastewater each day and then discharges it to the Sacramento River. So a big deal, and obviously a large potential impact on the Delta. So that project upgrade is really from a mandate back in 2010, where the Regional Water Board set new treatment standards for the regional sanitation district. And these are among the toughest standards of any facility nationwide. They went from secondary treatment to tertiary treatment. And the heart of that Echo Water project is the biological nutrient removal aspect, which is now fully operational. And it virtually eliminates ammonia from the wastewater before it's discharged upstream of the Delta. And so that's kind of where our role comes in. Our relationship to that project is when we learned that this was happening, our lead scientist at the time, Dr. Cliff Daum, really saw this as a tremendous opportunity to learn from the before and after of this upgrade. I mean, it's not every day you spend $1.5 billion in the Delta on a public works project. So he quickly pulled together a number of researchers and experts, and we were able to fund a series of extensive mapping surveys and other research to give us a detailed snapshot of the Delta, including nitrogen levels, nutrient dynamics over space and time in the Delta. And we call this Operation Baseline because it was really intended to understand the before the upgrade happens so that we can then understand the impacts of the upgrade. This is really also helping us to better understand some dynamics related to phytoplankton, which is a significant source of food for some of our species of concern in the Delta. And so I'm hoping that we can all continue to learn from the data generated by Operation Baseline for decades to come, and also build on that data set. There's going to be more to come on this. We're putting together a blog that we hope will come out in June. And so I really want to give a shout out to Dylan Stern from our staff, who's really been instrumental in making Operation Baseline a success, and also to former lead scientist, Dr. Cliff Dahm, for his efforts and leadership and seeing the opportunity that did exist and the unique role that the Delta Stewardship Council could play in quickly pulling together that investment. So exciting project. I don't have anything to report this month on covered action certifications. No comment letters sent this last month. I do have a couple personnel announcements I'll quickly share. First, a face that you will get to know quite well, Emma Askey is joining the council as our public participation liaison and council clerk. So that's a position that's been vacant since Beck received a promotion, and we're in dire need of that support. So we're so excited to welcome Emma. She's coming to us from the Earth Justice Alaska regional team. So she's been based in Juneau, Alaska, and she is going to be relocating to Sacramento. She received her BA in English with a double minor in environmental policy and planning and history from UC Davis. And so we're really excited to have Emma's support. And then I also want to welcome Gabriella Chen. She is joining the council as a summer intern through the Arizona State University's Sacramento Scholars Program. She's a current student attending Arizona State University, and she has majors in political science and history education. She previously worked at the Arizona State Capitol, and that inspired her to apply to this Sacramento Scholars Program. She's going to be with us through the beginning of August and helping Brandon with legislative tracking, also helping our public participation unit with meeting planning and working on social media. So welcome to Emma and Gabriella. We do not have a legal update today. However, we do have a legislative update. And as I invite Brandon to unmute himself here, I want to kick that off. So last week, Governor Newsom announced a set of trailer bills seeking to streamline infrastructure projects throughout the state, including water projects, water supply projects, and others. And one of those trailer bills addresses the Delta Reform Act. So the proposed changes in the trailer bill are those that the council has considered over the past few years, and they are intended to address some of our lessons learned now that we have a decade of implementing the Delta Plan under our belt, a decade of being engaged in litigation on some of those decisions. And then also now we have the experience of our covered actions process having gone through 4 appeal hearings. And so the changes seek to add clarification and improvements to how we implement the Delta Plan. They're more refinements than they are what I would call streamlining. So I'm going to invite Brandon, our legislative and policy advisor, to provide an overview of the trailer bill, as well as some highlights from the larger infrastructure package and any other updates that he may have. Brandon, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you, Jessica, and good morning, everybody. So if we can get the legislative update presentation up.
AGP, can you share the presentations?
While we wait, I'll go ahead and I'll get started a little bit, just going over the Reform Act portion of the. I'll start with the Reform Act refinements, and then I'll go a little bit more into the details of the other trailer bills that are part of the governor's infrastructure package. So the Reform Act trailer bill has 4 components to it. The first one is establishing a 60-day statute of limitation period for challenges to the council's adoption or amendment of the Delta Plan or its appeals procedures, and that's in addition to the council's decisions on appeals. So this provides certainty for projects that are found consistent with the Delta Plan, and also adjusts the time frame, the track statute of limitations of very similar other agencies. So it's very similar to the Delta Protection Commission's current statute of limitations, the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, and other similar state agencies. The second portion establishes that the remainder of the Delta Plan would stay in effect if a court finds a portion of it invalidated through a judicial challenge. This is a common protection in state law, consistent with very other similar statutes, and also furthers the legislature's intent of empowering the council with the administration of a legally enforceable Delta Plan. And you'll see from those two, a theme of a lot of this is just similar statutes with other agencies. And if you can go to that slide, thank you. The third portion establishes, one has to do with quorum. So establishes that once a quorum requirement is met for a meeting, a majority of the council that's present as part of that quorum can carry out the powers vested in it. So including determinations on appeals. So it just establishes that, makes clear that when a quorum is established, that a majority vote of those council members present can still take action on council business. And this is particularly important, especially over the last few months, where in the case of vacant positions, absences, and recusals can sometimes get us close to that quorum for the council, which is around 4 when we have, which is 4 with our 7 members. And then the last portion is to the timeframe for the council's decisions on appeals for certifications of consistency. This would extend that time frame between a hearing and the final determination by the council from 60 to 90 days. This, as you know, as all you know, appeals are complicated and very work intensive. And so this provides the council some flexibility for a modest time extension to consider and analyze those appeals. And then especially when faced with the potential for multiple or simultaneous appeals at the same time, gives the council staff a little bit more flexibility. So those are the 4 components of the trailer bills. I'll go ahead and open it up to council questions here first before I jump into the infrastructure package.
Thanks, Brandon. I'll look to the council to see if you have any questions, comments. And I'm trying to see if I have anybody's hand raised. I don't think I see anybody. Beck?
Okay.
Brandon, I don't think I see anybody.
Yeah, no, I don't see any hands raised, so I'll go ahead and continue. If you can go next slide, please. So as Jessica and I mentioned, this was part of a larger package that was introduced by Governor Newsom just last Friday in order to attempt to streamline infrastructure projects throughout the state. So this includes trailer bills and executive order. The executive order N-18-23 establishes an infrastructure strike team to take a look at how infrastructure projects are being undertaken in the state and identify ways to potentially streamline those infrastructure projects. This is related to water, climate change, and the like. The other portion of the package was an introduction of trailer bills. So these range from, you have the list there. I'll go into a few of them. I'm not going to go into each of them, but one is with administrative records review. So this changes the procedures for the production of administrative record for CEQA trials and proceedings. CEQA judicial streamlining. This extends the, so right now, for example, there's currently a 270-day limit on challenges for CEQA litigation, particularly for some economic development and stadium projects in statute currently. And so what this trailer bill would do is extend those exemptions to other similar projects for water, transportation, clean energy, and other similar projects. So this would require the completion of all CEQA legal challenges within 270 days of the filing of the record of proceedings. It does outline some water-related eligible projects, including the Delta Conveyance Project, the water storage projects under Proposition 1, water recycling projects, the desalination projects, or canal and conveyance maintenance. The last one is that I'll point out of note is there's a few there in the middle that deal with the way that particularly the Department of Water Resources and the Department and Caltrans contract. So progressive design build, which is a way of going about things where you can contract for the design and construction of projects at the same time rather than going through two separate processes. There's also a trailer bill dealing with the reclassification of some fully protected species, reclassify or ensuring that they're still classified under the California Endangered Species Act. So that's a general overview. I will point out I have the link there. You can find the text of each of those bills as well as the fact sheets that the Department of Finance produces for each of them at that website, on the Department of Finance's website, that I'd be happy to email to the members as well, if that is helpful. And then you'll notice that the last one there at the bottom of the list is the Delta Reform Act trailer bill I mentioned earlier. Any questions on the infrastructure proposals? Yeah, Maria.
I have
Maria.
one.
Oh, sorry,
Thank
Virginia.
you. Two questions I have. I read a little bit about it ahead of time, and what was unclear to me was, is there a body that qualifies a project to be exempt? And are there certain criteria other than what we just go generally that qualifies a project? That's the second question. And then the third question, is there a priority list of those projects? Because I couldn't find it.
Some of this I'll have to get back to you on, delving a little bit more into the bill, but my understanding is that, for example, who can designate the projects, I believe the Secretary of Natural Resources, for example, for water projects could do that. As I mentioned, that list that I read off of the water-related eligible projects is what's currently listed in the bill. So those are the examples of projects that the bill specifically names as projects that could be streamlined under it. And then, sorry, I just forgot your third question. What was the third question?
Or is there a list of priorities?
Priority
Projects that are already earmarked?
Yeah, that one I'd have to get back to you on, but
Okay.
but yeah, the same thing, that, like, for example, the Delta Conveyance Project, water storage projects under Proposition 1. So that's, for example, Sites Reservoir would be one of those, and other reservoir projects that were funded by Prop 1. So that prioritization is already
Prop one, okay.
part of the bill,
Sure.
as
Oh,
it is currently.
got it. And the body, you said it's the natural resources that qualifies.
For I think for the water projects, I imagine that
Sure.
I'll have to look at the details, but I imagine, for example, the transportation secretary could do so for transportation projects, and so
Okay.
on.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Brandon, there was also an executive order, correct, that seeks to stand up a some sort of
Yeah.
strike team? Can you speak to
Yeah,
that?
so that infrastructure strike team, I imagine, would probably be part of that as well. So this is a body made up of, I think, almost every secretary in the governor's cabinet, OPR, and a few other representatives as well. Office of Planning and Research, sorry, that are part of it, and it's part of identifying those projects as well. So that strike team will also, I believe, be establishing what kind of projects could be eligible under that streamlining.
I see. Great. Thank you.
Thanks for that clarification, Brandon. I was wondering how that strike team fit into this. So that explains it.
Yeah, and I can follow up with more details too,
That would-
in an email to the members.
Yeah, that would be great. Really
Yeah.
good. Other questions, comments?
Just real briefly, Virginia, I can just give you
Sorry.
just basic idea about the strike team. So there's 4 things it can do. It's identify projects on which to focus streamlining, support coordination between federal, state, tribal, and local government. They're supposed to support infrastructure through in sectors through complementary investments in adjacent sectors, and then they're supposed to share challenges and best practices to identify opportunities for improvement. So definitely one of their tasks is to identify projects for streamlining.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting mix of individuals that are going to be, I'm guessing, asked to be a part of that.
Yeah.
Brandon, you mentioned that there's going to be obviously a number of key cabinet secretaries positions that will be part of that as well, correct?
Yeah, my read, I think, most, if not all of them, are part of it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I also find it a little perplexing that stadiums have always been part of that 270-day exemption. Who came up with that rule? We're talking about water and the future of the state of California, and yet stadiums. I can't wrap my hands around that one. But anyways, digressing a little bit.
Okay. Yeah, any other questions on the infrastructure proposals?
Any other questions? And I apologize because my screen, I'm only seeing the presentation and I only see four people on the side. So I can't see if anybody has their hand raised.
No.
If not.
Okay.
Yep.
And yeah, next slide, please. So one other portion that was also announced in the last few weeks was the governor's May revise to the budget. So you'll remember that the governor introduced his budget back in January. Then in May, after the tax receipts come in, the governor releases his May revise. He released it on May 12th. The one thing of note is that the projected deficit, which I reported back to you for the original governor's budget, was 22.5 billion, is increased to 31.5 billion. The way that the governor currently attempts to address this additional shortfall is through additional shifting of cost funds, delaying some funds, and then targeted trigger cuts. And the trigger is that if the economic picture and fiscal picture of the state improves over the next year or two, then those cuts could be reinstated. Some key items in particular from the governor's May revise a couple of weeks ago that might be of interest to members. The governor did mention the upcoming potential for a proposed climate bond that might be introduced by the governor's office, as well as the original $40 million cut for San Joaquin floodplain funding was reinstated with this May revise to address particularly for the Central Valley flooding and upping those levies. Two other things of note that I don't have on the slide, but like one reduction of note, and this is more due to the changing outlook of the drought from going from drought to now flood. $24.5 million for the Delta salinity barriers for Department of Water Resources was taken back just because there's no longer a need to install salinity barriers this year. Although I'm sure that might be talked about later in the agenda. And then additionally, 25 million for the Landflex project that the Delta Conservancy works with, which is the agriculture and Delta response program, also was reduced due to the not being in a drought anymore currently. So those are a couple more updates from the May revise, and happy to answer any questions on that. And if there aren't, if there's any questions on that, I'm happy to answer them.
Oh, yes, Councilmember Wesso.
Oh, sorry, Ann.
Yes, I just wanted to add to the information about the deficit. You know, in California, some of the biggest, most populated areas are included in a tax deferral that will tax deferral that will take place in October 16th, I believe is the date. But that should so there's a pretty large swath of the population in California that haven't paid their taxes yet, and so that could translate into a correction in the deficit amount from 31 billion to maybe probably substantially less. So that's something, unfortunately, we won't know until the fall after the budget is approved. However, should the legislature, I know in previous years, we passed budgets that were contingent on other funds coming in, because we had a similar issue about 4 years ago where we made a budget that was contingent with COVID. There were some problems with funds coming in, and there were also deferrals back then. And we were able to balance the budget based on projections that additional funds would come in, and they did. And I think this year they will. And so it's going to be interesting to see how they approve this year's budget to account for money that could come in October and in November.
Yeah, it's a good point, Councilmember. Thank you for the reminder. And yeah, just for process for everyone too, the legislature will have until June 15th to pass this budget, the budget on its side, and then for the governor to sign. And then in terms of the trailer bills as well, those go through the process with the budget as well. They could be approved by June 15th, although they could also be approved around that time too. So sometime over the next month or so, there will be more clarity on the trailer bills and the budget.
Brandon, quick. Oh, sorry. First, Councilmember Burgess.
Oh, thank you. Brandon, do you want to look into your crystal ball and use all your wisdom from everything that you've done to comment on what's going on with the federal government and the budget process. Do we see any impacts? Do you see
yeah,
sorry.
I don't know if my crystal ball goes all the way out to Washington, DC, but
But yeah,
um,
and Ben, you might have some comments on that as far as probably in the past, but I'm just curious of what we anticipate if there's going to be some challenges with even short term on the things that are happening in DC.
yeah, I would have to get more detail. I know that there would be impacts, but I can get more details for you, Supervisor Burgess. And then, yeah, if Senator Hueso has any details too, you'd like to share, that's always helpful too.
I think there would be major impacts. Do I think they're likely? I don't think they'll extend too far to make significant impacts. I think Washington will figure this out, if not in the first, second, third day, in time to prevent, because I mean, if California is banking on some of those funds to balance its budget, I think every other state is as well. And California's budget depends on federal government paying its debts, because we have contractual arrangements that involve those funds. So if they don't come through, we're in default. I just the amount of damage this would do to every single state in the union, I just don't see it happening in Washington. I think it's mostly political posturing. I think they'll come up with a solution at midnight or early in the morning, or I think members are going to be in Washington on the floor for as long as it takes to resolve this. And I think there'll be a resolution.
Sure, I suspect that too. I just know that as somebody that was a recipient of federal funds during the last time around, there is kind of things kind of shut down for a period of time, and then everything has to wind back up. And I don't know how big of an impact that has on the state versus, on the ground. Thank you.
And I do believe the governor brought it up in his May revise his presentation earlier this month. So I can look back to and look at his presentation and get more details in terms of dollar figures.
I've heard, just if I can add, I've heard some crazy proposals that they want to claw back funds that are associated with the Inflation Reduction Act. I just don't see that happening. That would trigger so many lawsuits and put the federal government in more fiscal jeopardy than actually moving forward with raising the debt ceiling. I just don't see them doing that, because it would just be foolish. They wouldn't gain anything from that. But it'll be interesting to see if there are any compromises made.
That's the key, compromise.
Compromise, I know. One more question for Brandon. What is the total dollars that the salinity prevention that is not going to happen this year that happened last year?
I don't have the last year in front of me, but there was 24.5 million for the upcoming year.
For upcoming year. Okay.
That was, but we do have Department of Water Resources that's presenting on the salinity barriers later today. So that might be a good question for them for what it was this past year.
Got it. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, sorry, Chair Daniel. Go ahead.
No. Actually, I just wanted clarification. So that 40 million for the San Joaquin floodplain, that's not going away.
No, that was reinstated with.
That was reinstated. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, I will. Jessica, do you have something else you want to add?
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I didn't know if you had another slide or if that was the end of your presentation.
Oh no, yeah, I'm going to pass it over to Viet Long really quick to give a quick update on 2 of the bills that we've been tracking.
Great.
Next slide, please. Yeah, good morning, council members. So I'll be covering 2 bills today, but first I just wanted to note that last week was the legislative deadline for bills to make it out of the Appropriations Committee of their House of Origin. Those bills that did not make it are now 2-year bills, and they cannot be taken back up until January. And those bills are highlighted in your packets. So the first bill today is SB 231 by Senator Hurtado, and it would require the Water Board, in collaboration with the Department of Water Resources and the Council, to develop a feasibility report for the development of a coordinated water measurement database. The bill is currently on the Senate floor. However, the author has stated that they intend to amend this bill in response to an audit report requested by the Joint Legislative Audit Committee on the topic of the management of surface water by DWR and the Water Board. And this report has been just published this morning. And we will continue to monitor this bill as it relates to the council's role. Next slide, please. Yeah, and the second bill is SB 586 by Senator Eggman. Current law requires Mossdale Tract and the city of West Sacramento to achieve the urban level of flood protection, sometimes referred to as a 200-year flood protection, by the year of 2025. And current law extends that deadline to 2028 for Mossdale Tract and to 2030 for West Sacramento. So this bill would remove those deadline extensions and instead provide that the original deadline to achieve an urban level of flood protection by 2025 does not apply as long as a flood management agency has one of the following: either one, an active federal study that has received appropriations in the current or last 2 federal fiscal years, or a completed federal study delivered to Congress within the last 4 years, or an authorized federal project receiving or awaiting the receipt of federal appropriations within the past 3 fiscal years. This bill has passed the Senate and will now start the process through the Assembly, and we will monitor this bill since it relates to levee protections in the Delta. That's all I have on those 2 bills, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, and one thing I'll just quickly add, particularly Supervisor Burgess, you had asked about AB 1488. So that one did not pass out of, did not make its deadline. So that is now a 2-year bill. And then the same for the salinity barrier bill that I've brought up a couple times over the last few months. That also did not pass through its policy committee deadline. So that also has now become a 2-year bill.
Mhm.
And if there's no other questions, then that's my report.
Thank you, Brandon. Well, on the rest of today's agenda, after our lead scientist report, then we will ask the council to consider reappointment of the Delta lead scientists for an additional 1-year term. Then the council will be asked to consider the possible approval of a contract with the UC San Diego Sea Grant for the 2023-2024 Delta Research Proposal Solicitation. And then lastly, we'll receive an update from the Department of Water Resources on the West Falls River Drought Salinity Barrier Project. And with that, I'll conclude my executive officer's report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jessica. Are there any questions of the executive officer's report? Okay. Thank you again to Brandon Vietlong and of course to you, Jessica. Beck, is there any public comment on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there's not.
Okay, moving right along, we will move on to item 7, and that is for our lead scientist report. And for that, we have Dr. Laura Larson. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Dueño, and welcome back, Councilmember Maranian. It's nice to see you again. So I think I'll start out my report today by asking for a show of hands, and all your cameras are on so I could see you. How many of you have had a chance to drive over the yellow bypass this winter and see it in its flooded state? Few, yeah, probably more than half. That's great. Well, the yellow bypass, which was originally designed as a flood control measure to protect the city of Sacramento, is widely viewed as an environmental and water management success story, as it is a project that has been demonstrated to achieve multiple benefits: economic benefits to rice farmers, flood control benefits to inhabitants of this part of the Central Valley, and environmental benefits that derive from reestablishing the connectivity of a major river to its floodplain. Now, for the few of you who were on the council in my first year as Delta lead scientist, including Maria, you might recall that I reported on one of the studies that documented some of these environmental benefits. In a study affectionately referred to as the Nigiri Project because of its attempts to promote benefits for both rice and fish, researchers funded by the Delta Stewardship Council, Department of Water Resources, and others demonstrated that managed inundation of the Yolo and Sutter bypasses, at times not necessarily needed for flood control, resulted in generation of large amounts of fish food, zooplankton, and higher growth rates and larger sizes of juvenile Chinook salmon that were using the floodplain for foraging and shelter. These outcomes can have positive impacts for those fish because larger juvenile salmon have a higher chance of survival when they migrate to the ocean. But questions still remain about the potential benefits of managed floodplains for fish populations and food webs at a larger scale, beyond the scale of the floodplain itself or the fish that are using that particular habitat. So today I'm spotlighting a pair of recent studies coming out of the lab of Dr. Carson Jeffries at UC Davis, who was funded by the Delta Stewardship Council to address these very questions. And if meeting services can put up the visual abstract prepared by our Sea Grant State Fellow Pooja Balaji, I'd be grateful. Now, I'll note that this pair of studies is also relevant to Science Action 3D, in the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda, which is to test and monitor the ability of tidal, non-tidal, and managed wetlands and inundated floodplains to achieve multiple benefits over a range of spatial scales. These studies are also relevant to the amended Chapter 4 of the Delta Plan, for which the second core strategy is to restore ecosystem function, which specifically calls for functional floodplains. Now, in the first study, which was led by Anna Sturrock, the research team sampled zooplankton and Chinook salmon in different parts of the Delta, including the areas within and downstream of the Yolo bypass and Cosumnes River. The Cosumnes River was included because it's the only unimpounded river in California, and consequently, it naturally inundates its floodplain in the wet season of most years. From the samples that the researchers took, they identified the types of zooplankton found and dissected the guts of the salmon to identify their contents. As expected, they found that the large-bodied zooplankton that typify floodplains, also known as cladocerans, and here their abundance is being shown in the yellow at the bottom part of the slide. These large-bodied zooplankton constituted the largest food source for salmon just below the floodplain, and particularly during the wet years. And in this particular case, the bar representing 2017 was representative of a wet year. And during those wet years, they found that the same was true for salmon captured even in the West Delta and Chips Island, well downstream of the source floodplains for those zooplankton. Salmon's stomach fullness tended to correlate with the amount of cladocerans they consumed and were likewise highest during wet years when floodplains are inundated. So collectively, these findings show that floodplain inundation has benefits for food webs and fish well beyond the immediate scale of the floodplains. Now, in the second study, which was, it's actually being shown as the first study on this visual abstract, but in the second study, which was actually led by Bobby Nakamoto, I think there might be an error in the reference there, poorly understood sources of food beyond zooplankton that originate from inundated floodplains and wetlands were evaluated for their impacts on fish. So in particular, there have been many questions in the science community about the extent to which the breakdown of detritus, which is a word used to refer to partially decayed organic matter from plant material, is a foundation of delta food webs compared to algae typically associated with the open water areas. Now, thanks to relatively new methods, scientists are now able to identify the original source of the amino acids or the building blocks of proteins found within the tissues of fish collected from the Delta, and whether those amino acids originally came from algae or came from some of these detrital, less well understood food sources. So in this study, the research team applied this approach to trace the amino acids from tissues of Chinook salmon, rainbow trout, and American shad. And they quantified the extent to which these originated from different possible sources, including algae, bacteria, and fungi, which break down detritus, and plant materials. Now, findings indicated that while algae was the main basal food web source of amino acids within the tissues of most consumers, bacteria, fungi, and plant material were the main sources for some individuals. And in addition, there was strong evidence that bacteria and fungi serve as important secondary basal food web sources across the tissues sampled. So collectively, these two studies highlight the potential for the accumulation of multiple benefits for food webs that result from the reconnection of channels to floodplains and wetlands. Not only do such actions generate food for native fish within and downstream of these landscape features, but they can also supplement detritus production with cascading impacts up through the food chain. So this new understanding is going to better help us better account for the quantification of benefits associated with floodplain and wetland restoration and tidal reconnection. Any questions about those two studies? Well, if not, I'm going to move on to the next part of my report. And it's been a really busy spring for us in the Delta Science program. I think you've gotten a bit of a sense for that already, but
I have maybe one question.
oh, go ahead, Maria.
Is there a general big conclusion from all this that we could come to in terms of summarizing the science into what would be a big finding of this?
Yeah. So I think it's really just an affirmation. So with the amendment of Chapter 4 to the Delta Plan, one of the things that is proposed as a strategy for enhancing the functionality of Delta ecosystems is to reconnect floodplains to waterways. And this is just, we understood that this was likely to be a good thing. This is affirming that many of the ways in which we thought the use of managed floodplains would enhance Delta food webs. This is affirming of those hypotheses.
Thank you. Thank you for
You're welcome.
Thank you for clarification. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's been a really busy spring for the Delta Science program. There have been a lot of meetings happening, both meetings that we've hosted, which I'll talk a little bit more about, as well as meetings that members of the science program have attended. And I'm just going to start out by saying that last week I had the pleasure of attending the Community Surface Dynamics Modeling Systems workshop in Boulder, Colorado. And there I was asked to provide the opening plenary for the meeting, which had a theme of advancing accessible, reproducible, interlinkable modeling tools for the Earth surface processes community. And that's a name very similar to that of the Collaboratory that I've spoken about, which is a major initiative for the Delta Science program. This is a meeting that was attended by scientists from around the world. And this year's meeting had a theme of patterns and processes across scales. So I chose to focus my remarks on the need for establishing agency, academic, community partnerships in the practice of modeling to develop resource management strategies that promote resilience in the face of climate change. And more specifically, I spoke of how inclusion of diverse communities of people who are affected by the outcome of management decisions can help produce consensus, new networks of communication, compromise, and trust. I used the Frank's Track Futures project as an example of the potential of this approach at small scales, and highlighted that the multi-benefit wetland restoration design that emerged from that project it has been very influential in thinking about how the Delta might adapt to climate change. And I also talked about how a process of co-production was embraced in our Delta Adapts initiative. I then discussed some of the challenges and needs associated with scaling this type of approach up regionally to the Delta, and then frankly to the state, which is so strongly impacted by resource management decisions in the Delta. I concluded by presenting the initial proposal for a collaboratory that emerged from a group of UC CSU agency partners following the integrated modeling framework meeting. And I got a lot of positive feedback about the talk, as well as some additional ideas for pursuing competitive funding opportunities for elements of the collaboratory. I also attended a fantastic clinic provided by a faculty member at Northeastern University that highlighted a new open source tool for participatory modeling. It's definitely something I think we could adopt for processes like Delta Adapts or some of the projects that we're developing in association with the Salinity Management Workshop Series. And I look forward to soon sharing what I've learned with staff. As you heard from Chair Medueno, the Adaptive Management Forum was also held early this month on May 4th. And I'll just provide a little more information about that meeting. First of all, it's a meeting that the Delta Science Plan calls for, and it's a biennial meeting. It's also called for in the 2016 Adaptive Management Review by the Delta Independent Science Board. The theme of our meeting was governance for adaptive management, and it was very well attended. As you heard earlier, Chair Virginia Medueno provided the opening remarks, and then later in the morning, Councilmember Diane Burgess presented on governance needs for equitable adaptation in a dramatically changing Delta watershed, with a focus on how equity and governance supports better adaptation. She highlighted the success story of the Dutch slough restoration, a project that engaged and enriched a whole community, including its youth. Those themes echoed through the whole program, which included storytelling and panel presentations from community representatives not typically given a platform at government meetings, including the Stockton Poet Laureate, who stole the show, members of Restore the Delta and Little Manila Rising, who called for engagement of youth in adaptive governance processes, and tribal representatives who called for the need to engage communities early in project planning processes, which echoes some of what we had heard in the tribal listening session last month. Some of the other key themes and takeaways, which I'll note were compiled by Kyra Wallace, the California Sea Grant State Policy Fellow in the Adaptive Management Unit, and presented to the Independent Science Board in their meeting last week. So some of these key themes and takeaways were that 1, building relationships and trust is key. 2, adaptive management is constrained under the current governance system. 3, there's a need for strategic instead of reactive adaptation planning. 4, there's a need for better funding and improved data collection and sharing. And 5, there's a need for coalition building and collaboration. I encourage you to check out the archive of last week's Independent Science Board meeting for a more thorough presentation of what came out of that workshop from Kyra. And then I just finally want to thank Council members Medueno and Burgess for their key contributions as well. And I'll note that a part 2 of the Adaptive Management Forum will take place on June 27th. And that meeting will feature interactive activities and discussions to continue the conversation around inclusive and equitable governance for adaptive management. Another meeting that I'm going to provide a more thorough report on is the California Water and Environmental Modeling Forum, which convened its 29th annual meeting on April 17th through 19th. The Delta Stewardship Council is one of the member organizations associated with QEMF, as the abbreviation goes. And QEMF was founded to facilitate an open exchange of information on California water issues, resolve technical disagreements in a non-adversarial setting, and ensure that technical work considers the needs of stakeholders and decision makers. I attended that meeting to network and advance some of the planning that we're doing for a modeling collaboratory. And program manager Dylan Stern, who you will actually see a little bit later today, also represented the council with a presentation on council-funded research and modeling. The key takeaway from Dylan Stern's presentation was that the council's investments in modeling biogeochemistry and ecological dynamics are really paying dividends. The modeling community has embraced linked hydrodynamic biogeochemical models And those models are very close to becoming tools that are used in real-time operations in order to better manage nutrients, aquatic vegetation, and other constituents. Some of those models were used to estimate the potential effects of the upgrade to the Sacramento Regional Sanitation District's wastewater treatment plant, which you also heard a little bit about earlier in this meeting. And with the completion of that project, the science community is now beginning to witness the outcomes, leveraging the science program's investment in high-frequency data collection. Those investments and some of those resulting data sets can and will continue to be leveraged to improve models for other imminent resource management needs, including better managing harmful algal blooms and informing restoration, management, climate change resilience, and/or future infrastructure projects. There were a few other presentations at QEMF that we attended that are relevant to current independent peer review panels facilitated by the Delta Science Program, which you'll hear a little bit more about in next month's lead scientist report. So the other meeting that took place recently was a meeting held last Friday, May 19th, that was a joint symposium by the UC Davis Coastal and Marine Sciences Institute and the Delta Science Program. And that meeting focused on implications of rising temperatures for coastal, marine, and estuarine ecosystems. I'm going to provide a more detailed report out of that meeting in your packet next month. And then finally, something on your radar for next month is that the decision-making under deep uncertainty seminar series, which is sponsored by the Independent Science Board with support from the Delta Science Program, is continuing. And at the last council meeting, you heard from ISB Chair Lisa Wanger about the inaugural seminar in that series. There's an additional report in your packet this month with further details. The next seminar in the series will take place on June 14th at 1 p.m. And we're excited to report that it's going to feature Robert Lempert, who's very well known. He's the principal researcher at the RAND Corporation and director of the Frederick S. Pardee Center for Longer Range Global Policy and Future Human Condition. The seminar is also going to feature Andrew Schwartz, who's the State Water Project Climate Action Coordinator for the California Department of Water Resources, and he'll be talking about some of the risk management approaches that are being used by the Department of Water Resources. The seminar as a whole is going to focus on available tools for decision-making under deep uncertainty and their applications in California. And then finally, I'll conclude with just a quick report on some of the numbers, some of the water numbers that we're seeing statewide. First of all, in terms of precipitation to date within this water year, the Northern Sierra has received 124% of the precipitation that's typical, and the Central Sierra has received 163% of typical precipitation. The numbers are a little bit bigger, though, if we talk about the water content that's preserved within snowpack. And this is really important for thinking about deliveries of water through the upcoming dry season. And these are some of the larger numbers you might have heard in the news, too. So the Northern Sierra has about 263% of the water in snowpack that's typical for this time of year. The Central Sierra is at 325%, and statewide we're at almost 400%, 389%. And that's largely due to much larger than average snow water content in the southern portions of the state. We're also seeing cooler temperatures in the waters that we monitor on the lower left of this diagram by about 2 to 4 degrees. So again, this is a really good thing for native fish communities within the Delta. And then in terms of reservoirs, our reservoirs are higher than what is typical for this time of year, with Shasta at 117%, Oroville at 122%, and San Luis at 133%. So that concludes my report, and I'm happy to take any questions about anything I've reported on.
Thank you so much, Laurel. Any questions, comments for Laurel? Yes, Councilmember Burgess. Oh, you're on mute.
I know, sorry. Thank you for the report, Dr. Larson. We've been there's been this anxiety over the snowpack melt and all of that. What are you seeing as far as, because we've seen some pretty warm temperatures. So has it been as accelerated as we expected and all of that?
No, we had a week of warm temperatures, but as you all know, it's a little bit cooler this week. And overall, the warming process has been on the slow side compared to what it is typically. So, there are still worries, particularly in the southern part of the state and the Tulare Lake Basin, as you've been hearing in the news, about the 400% of the typical amount of water content that's within snow and what is going to happen when that melts. So, we could just hope for a continued slow warming process. Meanwhile, water management agencies are very aware of what's coming and are managing the reservoirs in a way that best optimizes between storage for the upcoming dry season and the ability to take on floodwaters.
So we can probably anticipate, since it is kind of a slower melt, that those water temperatures may stay a couple degrees lower like we're seeing.
I think that's a reasonable expectation. Yeah.
And we're seeing probably a higher level of oxygen levels because of the constant flow. So we may see less algae blooms this year as well.
Yeah, that's what we hope for. And I think, that this plays into a story that just really underscores the importance of agencies investing in long-term harmful algal bloom monitoring. The USGS has been doing periodic boat tours or boat trips of the Delta in which they sample water for harmful algal blooms and toxins at pretty high frequency. So they get a really good picture of what's happening across the Delta at different times of the summer. And a few months ago, they were in a really uncertain funding situation as to whether or not they would be able to fund this sampling effort in a year when it's particularly critical, because they haven't had the opportunity to do this sort of sampling during a wet year. So I do believe that the funding has come together for them, but I just think this anecdote really argues for the importance of long-term investment in monitoring things such as harmful algal blooms and the factors associated with those blooms, so that we could understand these dynamics during wet years and dry years.
Yeah, I know in Contra Costa County, we have this challenge of we don't know where to test, and it's just randomly we'll find them in different places. So thank you, Dr. Larson.
So I'll actually be participating in a meeting tomorrow with the regional chairs of the Water Board, in which nutrient management and the development of a statewide monitoring strategy for HABs is going to be a main agenda item. And they're really interested to hear what we're doing in the Delta and how it relates to the overall statewide strategy. So this is a really important topic that you bring up, and one that we're actively involved in.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, I have one.
Yes,
And I
Maria.
might be behind on, on the information, but it might be that off the record and off these meetings, I could, if there was any discussions about, everybody asks what this whole year meant to the Delta in terms of water supply and all that. Was there ever any discussion on this overall big picture global, at this meeting, at previous meetings that I missed? And if I have, if I could, talk maybe off the record with Laura and learn a little bit more about it, because it's such a frequently asked questions. So how does this impact the Delta? And I kind of, been out of it. So I just wanted to know if you guys know, and if you would direct me to have meeting with Laura off these meetings, or if there's a summary I can get to read.
Yeah, I'd be happy to brief you on Councilmember Moranian. I'll say that the Independent Science Board also had requested and received a presentation on how the Delta responded to the flooding events of the early part of the winter. So there is an archive of that at a previous ISB meeting. And I can point you to the archive of that presentation because I think that's something that you might be interested in hearing.
Wonderful. Yeah, thank you. If you could. Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Laura.
That was a great question. Thank you, Maria. And I just want to thank you, Laurel, again for a great presentation, very in-depth, and congratulations. You being asked to, continuously be involved in some of these meetings and actually giving opening plenary remarks. It really shows again your commitment and obviously your respect in all of these circles. And again, anytime I hear that there's opportunities and you get introduced to competitive funding, all the better. So it just helps to, again, advance our role, advance the role of our science program. And again, kudos to you because it's through your leadership. So want to just acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? And if not, Beck, is there any public comment on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Okay, excellent. And Daniel, might I say good morning? I don't think I said good morning to you or to Julie or to the judge. Just want to say good morning to everybody today.
Good morning, Chair. How are you?
Doing okay. Okay, we will now move on to item 8, and this is for a possible appointment of the Delta lead scientist. And for that, we will have Jessica will introduce our panel, or is it just I'm introducing the panel, and that's Dr. Lisa Wanger. Hi, Lisa, how are you?
Hi, Madam Chair. I'm wonderful. Thank you.
Good. Okay, I guess it's you.
Okay, let me just orient you to this topic. So, the Delta Stewardship Council appoints the lead scientist for the Delta Science Program, and in consultation with the Delta Independent Science Board. And Dr. Larson's term concludes in August 2023. And so you all are considering the reappointment of her for a second term that will only last until June 2024, unfortunately for us. So I'm here to give you the Delta ISB recommendation. I think after that presentation by Laurel and your comments, I think a lot of these statements from the board will be fairly obvious, but let's go ahead and go through our comments. So at the April 2023 Delta Independent Science Board meeting, we agreed to recommend to you, the council, to reappoint Dr. Laura Larson to a second term by unanimous vote of the 8 members that were able to participate in the decision. And I think for those of you who have been on the council for a while, you know that as lead scientist, Dr. Larson has really spurred a range of new Delta science. And to me, the most important thing is she's not just coming up with new ideas, but she's developing resources to move those ideas along, building partnerships, and also she's just a wonderful communicator of science. And I think I'm made particularly aware of that when I visit your meetings. So she's particularly adept at seeing the application of new findings across research topics and to inform management. And she has a range of accomplishments. We highlighted 3 in our letter to you. She oversaw the development of the 2022-2026 Science Action Agenda, which prioritized science actions to help fill knowledge gaps. And I'll just mention as an aside, that process is inspiring the Chesapeake Bay program to develop a similar process. She's helped build a shared understanding of the range of issues associated with saltwater intrusion, as you all know, and the different tools and strategies that are available to manage salinity, that very important habitat parameter. She's facilitated the development of a modeling framework and virtual collaborative center to integrate science data and models. So that collaboratory that she refers to, that's pretty bold vision that she's helping move forward. And she's led and participated in many other efforts. So I think like you, or certainly like the chair, we really have great respect for her intellect and accomplishments, and really appreciate the collaborative spirit that she brings to this science endeavor. She just really gets a lot done, and given her many tasks, it's really impressive. So with that, our recommendation is for a reappointment, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Lisa Wanger. You should be always recognized by your title. Thank you. That was an excellent summary. I'm going to open it up to comments, questions, and I'm going to start with Councilmember Zingali.
I just wanted to concur with all the content of the recommendation, but lift up one in particular because Dr. Larson is such a skilled communicator of science. And I feel like in these times and the challenges we face, not just in the Delta, but more globally, having skilled communicators of science is a matter of life or death for our species. And just so honored to have her. I was here for her arrival and benefited so much from these presentations and her work. And when it's appropriate, Madam Chair, I'd like to move that we reappoint Dr. Larson.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Councilmember Zingali. Yes, Councilmember Maranian.
Yes, I second what I heard from Councilmember Zingali. I think that, translation of science to English is a hard task. And of course, the good policy is always based on the data, good data. And I second and I concur with that. The only issue that I had was I just want to make sure that we have her for a certain kind of duration, that we have enough time to find the next successor.
Yes, great point. And yes, we'll clarify that a little bit more. Yes, Councilmember Burgess.
In working with water issues in general, one of my observations is that, this is a complicated topic, particularly in California, and that for people to become engaged, they have to understand. And so when you've got someone that with the understanding of science that can explain it on the terms and ways that people can hear it, that's a skill. It's not always something you see in scientists. So we've got that in Dr. Wanger and Dr. Larson and the rest of our independent science board, which I think is super important. I think the other part of it is that we all have to agree on the science, which is not always consistent in the way we all communicate and work together. And the independent science board and Dr. Larson being our scientist is, I think, contributing to helping everybody be on the same page and to discuss the same issues with the same data that we can all understand. And that's important. And I think the recent integration of bringing social science into discussion has been really valuable as well. So I will support this as well. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Councilmember Burgess. Any other comments, questions?
I would like to add a comment as
Yes, Councilmember Damrell, yes.
well. Despite my silence oftentimes during the course of these presentations, I am truly amazed at the ability of Dr. Larson to convey in very understandable terms what we need to know. And I would support, obviously, Mr. Zingali's motion. And I think it's entirely appropriate that I wish we could keep her for longer than 1 year, but be that as it may, I certainly would support the 1 year extension.
Great. Thank you so much, Councilmember Judge Damrell. And I know sometimes you are very quiet, but we know you are very much paying attention and you're very much keen into the issues that are being discussed. If there are no other comments or questions, I would just like to also echo a lot of what has already been said and reaffirm I think, and Laura, you don't have your camera on, so I can't see if see your reactions, but I think everything that has been said thus far, it really again exudes the person that you are, the professional that you are. And again, in my limited experience with scientists, and the very few scientists that I have met in my lifetime, I have not met yet one scientist that is as personable, to Councilmember Zingali's comments, and a great communicator, because that is exactly what you are. But it also tells me that level of personality that you bring and the great communication skills that you bring is because you are truly a impassioned professional, and you believe in what you do. And again, I just loved again how Dr. Weiner just said, you not only know the subject matter, but you bring the resources and bring again and help in developing the partnerships to bring this together. So I can't stress how incredibly impressed I have been, and what a true pleasure it's been to get to work with you, and absolutely would support the motion. And so I see that we have a motion by Councilmember Zingali and a second by Councilmember Moranian. Beck, would you please lead us in a roll call vote?
Absolutely. Councilmember Burgess.
Yes.
Oh, before we do that, I'm so sorry. I did a faux pas. Is there any public comment on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Okay. Now, please.
Councilmember Burgess, I'm sorry.
Yes, again.
Okay, great. Councilmember Damrell.
Yes.
Councilmember Hueso.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Moranian.
Yes.
Councilmember Zingali.
Yes.
Chair Dueño.
Yes. Motion approved unanimously. Thank you again, Laurel. And again, congratulations. And we wish this was a 15-year extension, but unfortunately it's only one. So we'll take what we can get. Moving
Chair
on.
Dueño, can I respond to this?
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you all for those words. It really means a tremendous amount to hear that affirmation. And I also wanted to say that if I loom large, it's because I stand on a very tall mountain, and that is all of the Delta Science Program and council staff that have supported these efforts and stimulated ideas and have really made these endeavors a success. I feel I could take very little credit personally, but I really appreciate all of the comments and look forward to working with you all for another year. I've grown tremendously and learned a lot in this position, and I'm very grateful for all of the opportunities.
Great. Thanks, Laurel. Appreciate those words. Okay, moving on to item number 9, and this is consideration and possible approval of a contract with the Regents of the University of California, San Diego, California Sea Grant for the Delta Science Program 2023-2024 Delta Research Proposal Solicitation, Resolution number 2023-04. And this is an action item. And to lead us in this discussion, we have Dr. Laura Larson again. And you will introduce our panel. Yes.
I'm going to turn it over very quickly, but I am excited to introduce a panel of 4 amazing individuals who will be presenting this initiative to you. And that panel includes Dylan Stern, who's our science funding program manager and will lead the presentation. Dr. Jill Harris, a senior environmental scientist, Henry DeBay, the Deputy Executive Officer for Science. And then joining us from California Sea Grant is Dr. Leanne Guo, who is a research coordinator with Sea Grant. And I'll just say that this whole team has worked tirelessly to make our funding practices more effective, efficient, and responsive to the needs of science managers and the science community at large. And so I will turn it over to them to tell you more about this very important core function that we have within the Delta Science Program and the next steps for us.
Laurel, would you mind pulling up the PowerPoint for us? And let me be the second person, I guess, to congratulate you, Laurel. I just I'm super glad that you were reappointed just now. And thank you so much for all your hard work supporting the council and the science program. And we appreciate it. So anyways, moving on to the presentation at hand. Good morning, council members and Chair Madueño. It's really good to see you back here, Council Member Moranian. My name is Dylan Stern, and I'm a program manager for science funding at the Delta Science Program. For this presentation, as Laura mentioned, I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Jill Harris and Dr. Leon Gua from UC San Diego, California Sea Grant, which we will now refer to just as California Sea Grant. I am so excited today to present to you the 2023-2024 Delta Research Proposal Solicitation and our ask of the council to approve a contract to actually support this solicitation in partnership with California Sea Grant. Next slide, please. So today, as a team effort, we will be going through a lot. So I want to orient you at a high level to the Delta Science Program funded research. We will then be sharing the stage with California Sea Grant to provide some context and background about their program. And then we're going to highlight what's new for the upcoming Delta Research Proposal Solicitation, sort of in comparison to the two prior solicitations. And then we'll go through like a timeline overview for the solicitation and really want to go over at a high level how we anticipate evaluating the proposals that are received. And finally, we will end with the staff reports action item request for your consideration. So next slide, please. Funding research is central to carrying out the Delta Science Program's mission to provide the best possible unbiased scientific information to support, to inform water and environmental decision-making in the Delta. Funding research is literally the first thing that's also mentioned in our mission. It's a huge part of what we do. The importance actually reaches even beyond our mission. It directly supports the co-equal goals and implementation of the Delta Plan by helping to develop management tools, advancing the state of knowledge, and providing the best available science to inform decision makers. The Delta Science Program funded research includes several mechanisms. One of them is the Delta Science Fellowships, which we also do with California Sea Grant. It's funded by the science program and administered by California Sea Grant. We offer directed actions, and today the main focus is the proposal solicitations that we offer. It's really what we think of as the gold standard for attracting the highest quality research. And so just to touch briefly on a history of science program led competitive solicitations, we are really trying to build our program, and we want to keep our promise to provide a recurring major competitive funding opportunity for research that solicits the most competitive research projects to inform water and environmental decision-making in the Delta. So in the previous two Delta Science Program solicitations, the council has awarded around $30 million for Delta research in partnership with the United States Bureau of Reclamation, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Prop 1 grants, and the state water contractors. The staff report really goes into a lot more information about that if you're interested. And so now we are ready to proceed with another Delta Research Proposal Solicitation this year. The 2023-2024 Delta Research Proposal Solicitation has not been released yet. It will be soon, but you do have an information sheet, which is attachment 2 that highlights some of the key details, and we're going to go over those as well. I really just want to emphasize that this solicitation and the fellowship program would not be possible without our partnership with California Sea Grant. They have facilitated the previous two Delta Science solicitations in 2018 and 2020 in coordination, collaboration with the Delta Science Program. And their mission really aligns well with the science program. They strive to harness the power of research and outreach while remaining a neutral broker of scientific information to inform a healthy future for all Californians. And to talk more about California Sea Grant, I'd like to introduce Dr. Leon Gua, Research Coordinator at California Sea Grant. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Dylan, for that introduction, and good morning, council members, and to all those who are participating in today's meeting. I also like to offer a big congratulations to Dr. Larson on her reappointment. We've really enjoyed working with you and the many wonderful individuals at Delta Stewardship Council, and we really look forward to continuing to do so. So as Dylan said, my name is Leon Goa, and I'm the research coordinator for California Sea Grant. I'm here today just to provide an introduction to our organization and share how our experience in research award coordination and administration allows us to maintain a strong and mutually beneficial partnership with the Delta Stewardship Council, a partnership that has actually gone on some 20 years. Next slide, please. Sea Grant, if you're not familiar, is a federal university partnership between NOAA and 34 university-based state programs in every coastal state, including Guam and Puerto Rico. Sea Grant is legislated to initiate and support programs in research, education, and outreach. California Sea Grant acts as a bridge between government, academia, industry, scientists, and citizens, linking assets at university and federal and state agencies with the needs of citizens, businesses, and decision makers. California Sea Grant is based in San Diego at UC San Diego and Scripps Institution of Oceanography, and we serve the entire state of California. Next slide, please. Our mission is to provide the information, tools, training, and relationships needed to help California conserve and sustainably prosper from our coastal and marine environments. California Sea Grant accomplishes this by collaborating with a range of local, state, regional, national, and international partners to further the co-production and application of relevant evidence-based knowledge. Next slide, please. Our program strategically addresses key issues related to marine and coastal sustainability and resilience through work within and across defined focus areas, which consists of both cross-cutting and topical themes. Our cross-cutting focus areas include themes like diversity, environmental literacy, and education that are foundational to all of our work and applicable across each of the themes presented in the topical focus areas. Our topical focus areas provide thematic groupings to the wide array of our activities that address and respond to urgent coastal and ocean needs, and those include sustainable fisheries, aquaculture, healthy coastal ecosystems, and resilient communities and economies. Next slide, please. Sea Grant uses a three-tiered approach to achieving our mission: research, education, and outreach. So for research, we provide awards and funding to the larger marine and coastal research community in California. For education, our program devotes most of our investment in the form of research and policy fellowships, mostly at the graduate and postgraduate level. And for outreach, we have programming in communications and extension. So through this three-tiered approach, our program engages and builds relationships with coastal communities, key partners, and community members to jointly identify and address pressing needs and new opportunities through applied research, technical assistance, and outreach. The knowledge is then collaboratively applied to address the issues. This process of collaborative discovery, co-design, and problem solving is at the heart of our operational model. Next slide, please. Since the proposed resolution today is to enter into a new contract with Sea Grant to administer the 2023 proposal solicitation notice, we're providing a brief overview of our extensive experience in competitive research funding, as well as highlighting the existing research competitions we've administered for the Delta Stewardship Council. Competitive research awards and fellowship are truly the bread and butter of our program, and I believe we can safely say that in the last couple of years, we have administered more requests for proposals, or RFPs, than any Sea Grant program in the country. For almost all of the RFPs I'm about to highlight, our team, principally the fiscal team, science integration team, and program leadership, have administered both the research competition, or as some people might refer to as the pre-award process, and the management of the lifetime of the awards themselves, or the post-award process. So for our NOAA Core Awards for California Sea Grant, we have annual or biennial funding solicitations, or RFPs, that are funded by our federal omnibus. These focus on cross-cutting and thematic focus areas I shared earlier, including priorities such as pathways to inclusive research training, graduate research fellowships, and aquaculture research. Next slide, please. We've also combined our federal dollars with state dollars to create larger and more impactful RFPs, addressing shared state agency and Sea Grant science needs. These are three recent research competitions where California Sea Grant leveraged our research funding resources with those of the California Ocean Protection Council, commonly referred to as OPC. And we partnered with OPC for these competitive research calls for kelp recovery research, ocean acidification and hypoxia research, and microplastics research. And we do just note the total amounts that was distributed through those RFPs. Next slide, please. We have also had several RFPs where we facilitate coastal research funding in California by running research competitions on behalf of state agencies, meaning we don't have any of our own money. We are simply administering those RFPs on the behalf of our partner. We just completed a $5.2 million competition for deep ocean DDT research on behalf of the California State Water Resources Control Board. And as Dylan mentioned earlier, working with the Delta Stewardship Council to administer an RFP is not new for us. We supported Delta in administering the competition for the 2021 proposal solicitation notice, successfully competing about $9 million in research projects that address priority topics identified in the Science Action Agenda. Next slide, please. For 20 years, we have partnered in hosting the Delta Science Fellowship, a workforce development program that develops promising early career talent while advancing the state of knowledge underlying high priority science issues that affect the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. Many Delta Science Fellows have gone on to lead incredibly successful careers, including still working in Delta-related science and management. Each year, Delta Stewardship Council also hosts policy-focused California State Sea Grant State Fellows in multiple divisions and programs. And this year, we will have a new Delta Science Communication Fellow who will help develop communications and coordinate workshops related to the 2021 proposal solicitation notice projects. Next slide, please. So today we are here in support of our continued partnership as we've agreed to once again support Delta in administering a new round of the PSN, increasing our role this time in managing both the research competition and the awarded projects for their entire lifetime. We look forward to working with the Delta Science Program on this new contract to launch a new cohort of Delta-focused research projects. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was a quick overview of our program and the successes that we've enjoyed with the Delta Stewardship Council over the years. We are very thankful for this partnership, and on behalf of my director, Shauna O, she also expresses her appreciation for all of you and looking forward to our continued work together. You can visit our website if you'd like to learn more about us, or you can always send us an email. And thank you again for your time and consideration of this resolution. I believe I'll be turning it over to Jill.
Yes. Thanks, Leon, for that introduction and overview of everything that you do at Sea Grant for us and for the state. Let's go forward a couple of slides, please. So what we're proposing today in this contract is to continue and build upon our existing partnership with California Sea Grant. And we'll highlight some of the specifics here, but basically the way we're thinking about this is that the Delta Science Program will make the decisions and California Sea Grant will help us implement those decisions. So for the solicitation, the Stewardship Council staff will write the solicitation, and then California Sea Grant will advertise that opportunity using this broad national network. This council staff will establish the review criteria and review the letters of intent, and California Sea Grant would manage the submittal process with their online portal, eSea Grant. We would select the reviewers. The California Sea Grant would manage the review process, and then Stewardship Council staff would make the final award decisions. And as we mentioned, Sea Grant would administer those award agreements for the lifetime of the projects, which are usually about 3 years. So California Sea Grant is really qualified to provide this specialized support that we need for this solicitation because of the tools they have. As we mentioned, this online portal that's really effective and efficient at administering submittals of proposals and review. Their mission, it's baked into their mission to support research, outreach, and education. Their seasoned experience, Leon described all the ways they've done this, administering solicitations for other state agencies, including the Ocean Protection Council and the water boards. And their national platform, they're an affiliate of NOAA and they're part of this national network of Sea Grant college programs. And so they have access to this broad network, both to advertise the solicitation and to recruit and attract technical reviewers that we need in our review process, which I'll talk about in a moment. So we see that this collaborative partnership between the council and Sea Grant has really already yielded effective, efficient results and valuable outcomes for the council, for the science community, and really for the people of California who we think are benefiting from the research that we fund. Next slide, please. So what's new about the solicitation this year? You've heard that we've done this a few times in the past, and we've been really pleased with the research projects we funded, some of which Dr. Larson highlighted today. So we're doing some of the things the same, but we're always trying to improve and advance the way we fund research in the Delta. So this year, we're having closer and stronger ties to the most recent Science Action Agenda, which, as you'll recall, is this really broad, collaboratively developed document that prioritizes science actions for the Delta. There's a lot of support and buy-in into the Science Action Agenda from the Delta science community. So projects funded under the solicitation must directly advance at least one science action listed in the Science Action Agenda. Next, we're continuing our goal. Oh, sorry, not next slide. Next point on this slide, thanks. We are continuing our goal to support and call for social science and interdisciplinary projects that relate to the human dimensions of the Delta. So in an effort to continue to promote this type of research, projects that have a substantial social science component will be eligible for additional points during the review process. And I'll get into that in a little bit more detail. And finally, this year, we're requiring projects to have a letter of interest from a Delta community partner, a resource manager, or a decision maker. And this is because we're really looking for actionable science that's useful to or has connections with agencies, decision makers, or Delta communities. And this part, this requirement builds on the council's recent efforts to make science more relevant to the needs of decision makers in the Delta communities. So I'm referring to initiatives such as the Science for Communities event, Delta Adapts, and ongoing environmental justice work. So we're looking for our funded research projects to align with those initiatives. Next slide, please. Here's a high-level overview of the timeline of the solicitation process. So we're here today in May presenting the proposal solicitation to you, the council. We anticipate within just the next couple of weeks, in early June, we will release the draft solicitation for public review and feedback. In fall, the solicitation will open for proposal submittals. And about a month after the solicitation opens, we'll have a deadline for the letter of intent. And I'll discuss that in a little bit more detail when I get into the review and evaluation process. Proposals will be due at the end of the calendar year in December 2023, and then we'll spend a few months doing a really rigorous review and evaluation process. And we anticipate announcing awards in May of 2024, and then research projects will begin as early as July 2024. Next slide, please. Here's a little bit more information about the proposal evaluation process. So the first step is the letter of intent review, and this is reviewed by Delta Science Program staff to ask, is the project appropriate for the solicitation? Is it relevant to the Delta? Are the entities eligible for funding? Next, we do an administrative review just to check that all of the application requirements were met, that they included all the required parts of the proposal. And then we move on to individual technical reviews, which are conducted by subject matter experts from across the country that have really specific expertise in the area of the proposal. And we're asking them, is the proposal scientifically sound? Those individual technical reviews then feed into the review panels. We'll have one or more review panels depending on how many proposals we receive and what the subject areas are of the proposals. And these review panels ask how competitive is the proposal compared to other proposals we've received, and they use the information from these individual technical reviews. And the final step is the selection, in which the Delta lead scientist makes recommendations to the science program for funding. And the bottom half of the slide talks about all of the review criteria that we're asking our evaluators or reviewers to consider. So the first 2 points are scientific merit and relevance to the science action agenda. And those are the two most points in the review process. Then there's the social science component, which I mentioned earlier, which is in recognition of the historic underfunding of research on the human dimensions of the Delta. We are giving projects with a substantial social science component just a few extra points in the review process. And I want to be clear, this isn't to say that projects have to be in the social science fields. The way the criteria and the points are structured, it's possible to score really highly and have a really competitive proposal in a purely biophysical field. We're just giving this a few extra points to social science projects. We look at feasibility. Is it possible to complete the project given the time and budget and resources? We look at the team qualifications. We want really well-qualified, experienced researchers, but we're also considerate of funding a diversity of institutions and career stages. And we look at budget, of course, relative to the funds we have available. We're looking for projects that adhere to open data principles. This is something the Delta Science program has been working on a lot recently. And we also have caveats built in for special types of sensitive data, such as human subjects research or tribal knowledge, data that stems from tribal experts. So for those types of data, we have policies in place to develop appropriate data management plans to protect that sensitive data. And on the right side, these are the 3 different components of broader impacts that we're looking for in our proposal. So we want to see projects that have really thoughtful and effective community engagement. We're looking for projects that have positive impacts on vulnerable communities, which can include environmental justice. And we're looking for projects that have components of outreach and training. Next slide, please. So we've gotten a lot of help in developing the solicitation, and we're continuing to ask for help and guidance from our community. Within the council, we're getting a lot of help and asking for feedback from subject matter experts across the council, including social scientists, the planning and legal departments, the team that's implementing the science action agenda, and our staff that are working on environmental justice and science for communities initiatives. And this is because we want to make sure that the solicitation reflects what those teams are doing and really builds on their efforts. We have a plan in place, a process in place to solicit feedback from the tribes and make sure that our solicitation is accessible and responsive to their research needs. And then we're also coordinating with other funding agencies in the Delta. All right, next slide, please. So here is our official request for you today, and you can refer to your packet for more details on the resolution. Council staff recommend approval of Resolution 2023-04, which grants authority to the executive officer or her delegee to enter into a new contract with UCSD Sea Grant to facilitate and potentially administer the 2023-2024 Delta Research Proposal Solicitation. The proposed contract would be for an initial 5-year term with the potential for an up to 1-year no-cost extension, not to exceed the amount of $7,037,224, including up to $6 million for awards. And that, council members, is the end of our formal presentation, and we're all here and available to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Leanne, and Laurel for introducing. I will turn it over now to the council for questions, comments, and we'll start with Councilmember Zingali and then Councilmember Moranian.
Thank you, Chair Medrano, and thank you for that terrific presentation and the material in our briefing as well. I have a couple of questions. First, I'm wondering if you all have anything to say on the subject of diversifying both the reviewers and the recipients. If Sea Grant has something in your track record or plans for diversifying who reviews these and especially who receives them. Secondly, I was pleased to see the inclusion of environmental justice in the criteria. If you could just say something about how we will know whether that's working, if you have some measure of success or progress on that. And finally, if I'm understanding correctly, it's about $6 million in grants, for which it's about $1 million in overhead. Just wondering where that fits in the field. Is that similar to other proposals we looked at? Is that low for the field, a little high for the field? If someone could just give us some context for that ratio of up to $1 million for up to $6 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Zingali. Great questions. And who is going to take on the answering?
Yeah, well, I can start us off, and then please feel free to jump in with anything that I missed, which I probably will. So with respect to diversifying reviewers and the applicants, well, this is one thing that Sea Grant is really helping us out with a lot, and they have a very strong focus on this in particular. And so we've had a lot of internal efforts at the science program to diversify the science experts who are participating on the review panels. And we expect with more applications, hopefully in the social science, in the community science, in the tribal research fields, that we will need to expand our network to accommodate, and that to make sure that we have the right expertise to review those proposals. But also the way that they select reviewers, and Leon, please feel free to correct me here, but it's casting a wide net across different institutions across the country, and in different stages of researchers. So I don't know if you want to add a little bit to that before we move on to the second question.
Sure, I'll just add a little more. We do have DAJA goals, or diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, and accessibility goals for our program, which include ensuring that all those who are being funded by our program and those who are reviewing the research competitions are also of diverse backgrounds. So we've been doing a lot of work internally to revise our request for proposals to ensure that the evaluation criteria are going to reflect that we are trying to fund more diverse projects, more diverse people, and that our evaluation criteria and review process reflect that as well, including, hosting implicit bias trainings throughout the process of the review. So we've been very intentional on working on this over the past couple of years, and are very looking forward to working with Delta, since it sounds like there's certain components that would be more in your camp versus ours, but we're happy to work on that together to talk through what we've learned through our process of working on that particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, and we do track sort of the diversity of the reviewers and the applicants, and part of the selection criteria is to ensure that we do have a good diversity of applicants across different institutions, and making sure that the early career scientists are included and have opportunities as part of the broader impacts. So let's see. You mentioned the environmental justice work and how we're going to measure success for that. That's a good question. This is very new for us. I think any progress would be positive progress in this area. We always ask, the past two solicitations, we've always asked reviewers to make a statement on how their project may impact vulnerable communities. And I think we're really trying to make sure that that is, a focal point for researchers, so that they're engaged from the start with local communities or resource managers who are going to be utilizing the information from the research. And so I don't know that we have necessarily any metrics in place, but it is something that we really constantly want to improve each time we do a solicitation like this. And so, yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to add anything to that.
I'll just add that we're looking at inviting environmental justice experts to be on the review panel, or identifying reviewers that are versed in this area, because it's one thing to sort of look at a proposal and say like, oh yeah, they talk about environmental justice. That seems great. But we need experts to review, the hydrologic modeling. If you're not a hydrologic modeler, you can't speak to how valid it is. This gets back to your first question of diversifying reviewers and making sure that we have, if we're reviewing an environmental justice component of a project, we need someone who has expertise in that area weighing in on its effectiveness.
Thanks, Joe. And then, yeah, go ahead, Henry. Looks like you want to jump in.
Thanks, Dylan. Hi, everybody. My name is Henry DeBay. As Laurel mentioned, I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for Science at the Council. And thank you, Council members Zingale, for the really on-the-point questions. I just wanted to add on the EJ front that environmental justice issues are really baked into the 2022 to 2026 Science Action Agenda, which again, were collaboratively developed, and there's some science actions in there, excuse me, that really speak to advancing environmental justice issues and understanding. And again, as Jill pointed out, all projects that are funded really have to show a meaningful connection to advancing the Science Action Agenda. So that's another way that we're getting at those EJ issues, is through the SAA. And then Dylan, I didn't want to steal the spotlight on the question about the budget, but I can kick it off and then turn it over to others. So the contract with Sea Grant that we're proposing is roughly $7 million, as you pointed out, Council members Zingale. And of that $7 million, 6 will go straight through Sea Grant to the awardees, and 1 million will be for the administration by Sea Grant. And I think we think that's a very competitive rate for the work that we're asking. The period of the contract is 5 years with the possibility of extension to 6 years. So $1 million for administration over 5 years comes out to $200,000 per year. If it's extended to 6 years, that's $166,000 per year. And the work that's involved for all of that is, again, them running the entire solicitation through their portal, Sea Grant, administering the independent peer review panels and compensating reviewers from around the world, and also administering the awards and managing those awards, again, recognizing that the council remains in the driver's seat for any and all decisions. But so just wanted to highlight the duration of the contract. I think one other thing to point out is that we don't have any additional funding entities at this point, and that could change later on. There have been some signals from other state and federal agencies that they would like to contribute, as they have in the past. And so that's why some of the numbers on previous PSNs were a little bit higher. So I think that's also why there's a bit of a stark difference between the 6 million that we're contributing and the 1 million for administering. But again, I think that 6 might increase. So hopefully that just provides a little bit more clarity.
Very much so. Thank you for all the thoughtful and thorough answers.
Great. Maria, you took your hand in. Are you still?
Yes, I had 2 questions. One is that, it's a follow-up question. I just wanted to know if the outreach for the program is comprehensive enough for including, a diverse group of individuals. So I'm just reiterating, highlighting that point, that the outreach is important. I mean, how do people get to know about it, all that. That's one question. And then the second question was, there was a bullet on social science component. And I understand that all these projects that have very technical and scientific nature have a big policy implication, how do they impact and who do they impact? What do you really meant when you said social science component?
Thank you so much for your questions. I really, truly appreciate that. So I think for your first question about outreach, this is something that we are working on to improve every single time that we do a solicitation. And we really hit all of the venues that we possibly can, including new universities, new colleges that we haven't contracted with before. And I think having Sea Grant as part of this national network where they advertise, that really gets a lot of ground coverage. And then we also plan to do a lot of targeted, outreach, especially with, tribes. We plan to hold tribal sessions specifically for that. And then, just, trying to target new universities, I think is like the main part of it too. And just trying to spread the word as far as we can. And it's an ongoing process to improve that. Yeah.
Continuously improve that. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And then your second question about the social science component. So there, I don't know.
Just say, how do you include the social science component in a scientific project, in a research? I just want to know what does exactly mean when you say that.
Yeah, I can answer this one. So this is not required for every project. If it's a purely, biological project or hydrology or geology project, it doesn't need to look at the social sciences. But we are willing and eager to fund projects that are in the social sciences. It could be a research project on governance in the Delta, or human behavior and choice around farming, or the economics of decision making or something like that. So we could fund a project that's has a principal investigator from the econ department and doesn't have any sort of biology or hydrology or geology involved. And we could also fund a maybe a really cool interdisciplinary project that combines some of those disciplines. So that's what we mean by that. It doesn't have to be.
So
the
there's
natural
an extra effort to find people that can bring together these two things, science and social science, and or the impact of it. I mean, it's a lot of work. That's why I'm asking.
It's
and
a
it's
lot of
not
work.
just another bullet among a lot of bullets, It
Yeah,
is work, and it requires attention and, upfront work of how do we really bring it together in a meaningful way.
Yeah. You nailed it. It's difficult and it's a lot of work, and it can be really beneficial if it's done well. In the last solicitation, there was a separate category for interdisciplinary projects, integrated social ecological systems. And we saw, I think, some really excellent proposals in that category. And in the years since then, we've done a little bit of outreach and targeted training and workshops on building an interdisciplinary projects. We had one this past fall that had really broad membership, where we brought attendance. We brought together scientists from the social science disciplines and the natural science disciplines who were interested in interdisciplinary work and just didn't quite have the skills or didn't know where to get started or didn't know somebody from another discipline and needed to just meet people and find out what was happening, what type of research was going on and where they might overlap. So we're hoping that with some of these outreach efforts, maybe we'll see some of these people are getting together and coming up with really neat ideas, and we'll see some proposals.
And I don't want to take all the time, but in my mind, I'm not sure this is in the gamut of what you guys do, but I saw this study of sea level rise on a DAC community, the impact of sea level rise on a DAC, of how, devastating it could be. And I know that this could not be exactly what this science board does. We are much more maybe into science then, but I just want to see the implications if they are studies, if we can pick studies that are highlighting the implications of everything that is happening on, social, as you said, social science or people who live there.
Yeah, I think, was this the study that looked at the demographics of people living along the coast? And that was really cool. And I think that kind of thing,
very cool.
Delta, we could look at impacts of sea level rise and subsidence and flooding on demographics. I think that is the type
very
of
good study.
research we'd be interested in studying and funding. And when we say science, we mean it to include social science.
Yeah, you hit on it. That's the study I saw. It was
that was a great study.
Because it had so many. I mean, we could not that it's going to happen right now, but it's such a clear action item list of things that we need to do, to prevent those disasters.
Yeah. Yep. With real implications and connection to people. Yep.
That's exactly right. I just want to add to that. I think the dearth of information about the human dimensions in the Delta is really compelling us to try to make a big push to fund more of that research, to really understand the social component of this ecological system that's really closely linked to the human dimensions. But we just need to look into that a lot more. We need a concerted effort to look into that. And I think the science action agenda, the new science action agenda, that's really the focus of the solicitation, really gets into that as high priority. And then, related to your question about outreach too, we have this new science action agenda, and we're doing a lot of work promoting that in addition to the Delta Science Tracker. And all of these efforts are related. And so when we do that outreach, we're also, we're talking about all three of those together. And so that should help spread the word as well.
And I would just add that this call to integrate social science into the work that we do really dates back to a call from the Independent Science Board, which led to the formation of the Social Science Task Force. And so everything that we're doing right now to try to really promote more social science research is responsive to those calls.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, everybody. I think, Maria, you just opened up Pandora's box, but I think, again, it's very important. And yes, looking forward to hearing more about the whole social science component tied into this. But first, I want to go to Councilmember Lee, who's had her hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to say how appreciative I was that you all mentioned and highlighted the maintenance and administration of the contract. It's more than just putting out an RFP and handing out money. It's really following up on that and making sure that the performance measures in the contract are being adhered to and that we're getting good value for the money that we're putting out there. So I look forward to over the years hearing back from all of you on how that is going with each of those awards that we hand out. And I'd like to go ahead and make a motion that we approve the resolution to grant authority to enter into a new contract with Sea Grant and facilitate and potentially administer the Delta research proposal solicitation.
Oh, yes, great. Thank you so much, Councilmember Lee. Councilmember Judge Damrell.
Yeah, second.
Just quickly, Chairman Dueño, just want to make clear that we be careful that we get public comment before
Yes,
actions taken on
absolutely.
the
I was
item.
just going to say, yeah, if you could hold on just, and I had a couple of comments as well. So Henry, and thank you so much for jumping in and breaking it down because I wasn't quite sure about the funding and for the duration. So thank you so much for giving that explanation. That was my key question. And I think everything else was answered by the majority of all of you. So now we will go to public comment. And Beck, do we have any public comment on this item?
No, Madam Chair, we do not.
Okay. Again, just want to thank all of you. There's a lot of enthusiasm. I can see that this is truly something that we all benefit from with this collaboration and seeing that the Delta Stewardship Council serves as basically as the main decision-making entity with this. And you see San Diego Sea Grant is the administrator, not the administrator, the implementer, if you will, for the decision-making that the Delta Stewardship Council does. So I really like the partnership. I really think that this is a great, at one point I said it was a public-private partnership. It really isn't because it's public-public, but it's very impressive to see the work that Sea Grant does, continues to do. And so I think that this is really forging a partnership, again, to highlight and maintain and do all of the great work that we need to continue to do, all the great research that needs to be done, and just recognizing all of the awards that are going to be putting out there. And thank you again for highlighting again for Councilmember Zingali and his question, the whole issue of equity and making sure that we are truly hitting those benchmarks. So we have a motion by Councilmember Lee and a second by Judge Damrell. Now we can administer the roll call vote. Beck.
Councilmember Burgess.
Yes.
Councilmember Damrell.
Yes.
Councilmember Hueso.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Maranian.
Yes.
Councilmember Zingale.
Yes.
Chairman Dueño.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everybody. Again, looking forward to hearing more updates and love the enthusiasm and just love what you all are doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, council members. We'll be back with updates.
Yes, 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 and yes. Moving on to our next item, item 10, and this is a report from the Department of Water Resources for the West False River Drought Salinity Barrier Project. And for that, we're going to have our Deputy Executive Officer of Planning and Performance, Mr. Jeff Henderson. Jeff?
Great, thank you very much, Chairman Dueño. Good morning, council members. At the June 2021 council meeting, Department of Water Resources, or DWR staff, presented the council an overview regarding the installation of an emergency drought salinity barrier on the West False River at the same location as a similar barrier was installed in 2015 during extreme drought conditions. The council at that time also discussed some impacts to the Delta associated with that salinity barrier that was installed in 2015, including proliferation of invasive aquatic vegetation in nearby Franks Tract. In October of 2021, DWR again provided the council an update on implementation of the barrier and the observed impacts of that barrier in 2021 and described steps that DWR took at the time to delay the removal of the barrier in response to the evolving drought emergency in California. Since that time, DWR has been working toward completing a forward-looking project to potentially authorize deployment of the barrier in response to future drought conditions without emergency authorization. The council submitted comment letters to DWR in March and August of 2022 regarding environmental documents prepared for the project. Those letters identified that the project appears to meet the definition of a covered action under the Delta Reform Act, which would require submittal of a certification of consistency with the Delta Plan to the council. And we further identified 7 Delta Plan policies that are potentially applicable to the project. Council staff have been engaged in early consultation with DWR regarding this project going back to 2021, and we look forward to continuing that engagement prior to receiving a certification of consistency later this year. For today's update, I'd like to welcome Robert Trang from DWR, who will provide additional background regarding the project, as well as highlight some of the important lessons learned from installation of the 2015 and 2021 barriers that have informed the project's design. And Robert's accompanied by several colleagues from DWR who will likely help address the council's questions following the presentation. With that, I'd like to welcome Robert. Good morning.
Good morning, Robert.
Hi, can folks hear me okay?
We
Can.
can.
Yes.
Oh, well, I just realized by trying to turn on my camera, but I just realized, let me see here. I'm glad you're able to hear me, but let me see if I can turn my camera. I
Here
actually,
we are.
oh, cool.
You are.
Okay, awesome. Awesome. Okay, all right. So folks can see me and hear me. Is that
Yes.
okay? All right. So quick question. Should I pull up the presentation or will someone from the DSC pull it up? I mean, I don't have a preference one way or the other.
AGP will present for you.
Oh, okay, cool. Awesome. All right, let me see if I can minimize my screen a little bit here. Is there a way for me, sorry, I'm not super familiar with Zoom, but is there a way for me to kind of collapse down the size of the screen on my computer? Let's see, view.
Hi, my name is Thomas, calling you from COVID-19 Wellness Center. How are
Yes.
you?
Oh, okay, all right, I got it. All right, cool. Okay, all right, with that, maybe I'll get going just for the sake of time. So good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to present to the DSC council members today. My name is Robert Trang, and I'm a supervising engineer with the Department of Water Resources. Under the Division of Operations and Maintenance, I head up the Delta Planning section, a part of which includes the Delta Resiliency Planning Unit, which this project is being conducted under. Before I jump into the slides, as Jeff mentioned, I do want to acknowledge and say thank you to the DWR staff on this call and our consultant staff in support of this project. Without their collaboration and their hard work on this, we wouldn't be where we are in the planning process for this project if it weren't for their efforts. So with that, I'm going to jump into the slides so that we have some time on the back end for question and answer. So what I'll be talking about today is the proposed West Falls River Drought Salinity Barrier Project. Next slides, please. So this is just kind of an outline of what I'll be going over today. I'll start by going over the project need, and then I'll discuss the water quality in the Central Delta and how it looks like during a normal water year versus severe drought, and what these implications are to water quality in the Central Delta as a result of it. Many folks may already understand the basics on what happens during the drought, but I think it's important to kind of touch on it a little bit because it is pretty important in trying to understand the function of the barrier itself when we do have to put it in, and how it protects the water quality in the Central Delta. But more importantly, one thing I hope to kind of highlight for everybody here is that, you know, the water that many of us rely upon to some extent is, you know, it probably goes through this critical area, the Central Delta. So it passes through this area. I'll then go into the drought salinity barrier siting and how we landed on the project location. And then I'll go on to discuss our proposed barrier and how it helps protect the water quality in the Central Delta during severe drought conditions. And then we'll just kind of close things out on just some recap, and then we'll do a question and discussion. Next slide, please. So touching on the project need, many of us are probably longtime residents of California. So we are aware of the unpredictable and cyclical nature of severe drought in California. What this really leads to during a severe drought is that this really impacts the water quality in the Central Delta. As a result of this, drought actions are typically necessitated to try to alleviate the drought impacts, as it could lead to water quality degradation in the Central Delta. One of the effective tools that we have at our disposal is to construct a temporary rock barrier. Jeff had alluded to it. It went in 2015 and also in 2021 under the governor's emergency drought orders. When the barrier does go in, it does protect the beneficial uses of the water in the Central Delta by supporting agricultural needs. It also protects the value of habitat for aquatic species, and it protects the water supply to more than 27 million Californians. Next slide, please. So this slide's a little busy, but what it does cover is, if you refer to the figure there, what I'm trying to highlight is how water moves in and out of the Central Delta and how we try to maintain water quality of our fresh water during a normal or above normal water year for our beneficial uses. So if you look closely at the figure, the majority of the flows with good water quality comes down the Sacramento River from upstream reservoir releases and natural inflows. And that's kind of shown by the big blue arrow to the top of the figure. The flows in the Sac River travels north to south into the Central Delta region, which is kind of in the middle of the map there, where it meets San Joaquin River flows moving from the south to the north. These flows, along with the east side rivers, which is kind of the little blue arrow over to the right of the figure, they all converge in the Central Delta, where it then moves westward out to the ocean, the Bay Area. This is what we often refer to as the ebb tide or delta outflow, which is essentially the volume of water moving from the Central Delta out into the ocean. At the same time, we also know that the Delta is a tidal environment, meaning flows from the Delta can move from the Delta out to the ocean, but then flows can also go the other way from the ocean out into the Central Delta. And that's kind of highlighted in this red arrow here. It points both ways. The water pushing in from the ocean is much higher in salts, as many of you might know. This is a non-issue during a normal water year or an above normal water year. And so that helps to kind of keep the salinity at bay. This protects the beneficial uses of water in the Delta, such as for things such as aquatic habitat, allowing for freshwater delivery to in-Delta and other water users year-round, including Contra Costa Water District is one, and other water agencies. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the same figure, but I do want to kind of show this is what happens during severe drought conditions. We see from the tidal influence, we see the same tidal influence essentially during severe drought, during flood tide. In other words, the salty water out from the ocean water pushes inward into the Central Delta. But because we are in a drought, we no longer have the sufficient freshwater releases from our upstream reservoirs and the natural inflows in our river systems to keep the salty water at bay. This is depicted by my red arrows that I try to highlight. So essentially, during severe drought, a lot of our inflows and our upstream reservoir releases, they basically decrease just because we just don't have the storage and the natural inflows through our system. Over time, what happens over time is that the salt water pushes its way further and further into the Central Delta. I did want to kind of note also that this is also very critical because once we lose water quality in the Central Delta, once it starts to get contaminated, only high inflows can really kind of flush the system out and push the salts back out into the bay. And so that gets a little tricky because that is really dependent on Mother Nature. And sometimes we just don't know when we're going to get it. So the consequences of that is this negatively impacts Delta agriculture, the environment, municipal water supplies, and could jeopardize DWR's ability to make health and safety water deliveries through our state water project. Next slide, please. So this figure really highlights the difference in water quality during a normal water year versus severe drought, based on the 2 slides that I showed previously. The 2 figures is basically a comparison of the water quality in the Central Delta during normal water year, which is to your left, and a drought year, which is the figure to your right. The darker blue indicates cooler, fresher water compared to the red, which is the warmer, saltier water. If you focus specifically on the 2 red circles in both figures, which is in the exact same spot, you'll see the difference in water quality just based on when you have higher river flows, which is denoted by this larger blue arrow, and then the figure to your right, which the blue arrow to the right in the figure and to the right there is much smaller. And so I included this figure really just to show that during a normal water year, things are fine, as far as water quality in the Central Delta. But when we're in a severe drought, we just don't have those upstream releases and inflows to push the water out to keep the seawater from coming in. Next slide, please. So what did we do to kind of analyze and come up with a feasible solution to protect water quality in the Central Delta against saltwater intrusion during drought? First, we knew and understood that, trying to control the salts is a complex thing. There's a lot of interconnected waterways, as you can see in the figure there. So there's no easy way to really try to isolate a particular area. So in 2009, our modeling support branch within DWR conducted a hydraulic investigation into the use of temporary rock barriers at strategic locations to try to block certain waterways where we knew salty water could come in into the Central Delta. This included a single and multiple barrier locations at the same time, and hence you kind of see these zigzag lines. Basically, we looked at strategic locations, and we included scenarios where we would close out certain channels. We would put a channel closure at certain channels, or multiple channel closures. The conclusion out of that hydraulic study was that West Falls River was the most ideal location, and was the most consistent in achieving salinity protection against the various, across the various hydrologic conditions. Next slide, please. So protecting water quality in the Central Delta. So I mentioned through our hydraulic study, we pinpointed, closing out West Falls River, a channel closure through there would be the most beneficial. West Falls River, just the map there, is located in the Central Delta in Contra Costa County. Again, it is the optimal location to protect saltwater intrusion from the bay into the Central Delta and ultimately into French Tract. Intuitively, if you just look at the map, this also does make a lot of sense since geographically West Falls River does feed into French Tract from the west direction. That seems to make sense just based on a visual based on the geographic location of West Falls River and how it connects into French Tract. Slide 9, please, or next slide. So what is our proposed project and what is the objective? The objective is to protect the Central Delta from saltwater intrusion during severe drought. What we're seeking is we're hoping to get flexibility to adaptively manage salinity intrusion in the Central Delta in response to severe drought. What we're requesting is we would install the barrier up to 2 times over the next 10 years. Should drought occur, and the barrier would go in, if it does within the next 10 years, it would go in April 1st and would be taken out by November 30th the same year or the following year. So there might be some questions as to how we came up with the 2 install in 10 years. The first was we felt like, under a 10-year scenario, we could accurately assess the project impacts associated with 2 barrier installations. A 10-year period did seem to make sense and was consistent with federal permitting durations, other federal permitting durations. And we felt like based on a 10-year, it was a good compromise on basically, we know that drought is unpredictable and it's cyclical in the state of California. And so we felt like a 10-year period would kind of give us the coverage to deploy the barrier if needed. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned and Jeff mentioned earlier, the barrier did go in 2015 and in 2021. It was effective. It did maintain fresh water in the Central Delta and protected the beneficial uses for in-Delta water users and other users outside the Delta as well. It did maintain cold water for like in our reservoirs to release at later times for fish at critical times in the year. And it did allow for water delivery for agricultural and environmental benefits with, you know, the reduced Delta outflows that we were seeing during times of drought. The figure to your right is kind of similar in nature, but I mentioned a little bit earlier on a couple slides earlier about flood tide and ebb tide. So the two panels to your left are essentially the scenario where there is no barrier installed. And what you see kind of in the center of the figures is where French Tract and West Falls River is located. So the two figures to the left, once again, is the water quality that you see in French Tract without the barrier in place. And then the two panels to the right, the barrier is signified by the dark black rectangle there. That shows the fresher, cooler water quality in French Tract once the barrier is installed. Next slide, please. Oh, I do want to mention, can we go back to the previous slide? Sorry about that. I do also want to mention that, you know, we did, like I mentioned, we did install the barrier in 2015 and 2021. I just want to clarify that, you know, what we're proposing under this 10-year permit that we're seeking for this project is that this barrier will be installed at the exact same location. The only nuance with that is in 2015, I know there were some repairs done to the adjacent levees, but to strengthen the adjacent levees before we put the barrier in. And so that was one difference. And in 2021, when we installed it, we ended up keeping the barrier in for an extended period of time, up to 20 months, because of the prolonged drought conditions. And so that's the only difference. What we're proposing here is the barrier could stay in for 8 months, but then we could also prolong it to 20 months if the drought continues to persist. But once again, the barrier will be in the exact same location as it went in 2015 and 2021. Next slide, please. So some project considerations I wanted to kind of highlight to the council member. The first being that DWR, we don't want to build this project. You know, we only build it under dire hydrologic conditions, you know, due to severe drought. And so we know that this is kind of our last, you know, one of our last resorts. You know, we absolutely don't want to put the barrier in unless we absolutely have to. But when we do have to put it in, what we realized from the results we got from 2015 and 2021 is that the barrier is highly beneficial when we do have to build it. And then kind of like what I alluded to earlier, I think, you know, what we're seeking here is, you know, we're planning for the worst and hoping for the best as far as what we would get, you know, as far, you know, what Mother Nature would deliver. And what I mean by the worst case scenario is, I think, you know, so our water supply essentially would be compromised, could be compromised during a drought. Some real life examples I wanted to kind of mention is how this affects, you know, Delta farmers and our ability to successfully irrigate their crops. You know, that could impact us, you know, as far as what we can get at the grocery store, as far as selection and what we pay at the grocery store. Another example that kind of hits home is, you know, municipal supplies from water districts like CCWD can't provide their water supply in a safe, clean manner, which is what some of us rely upon. So my point in mentioning a couple of these examples is that protecting the water quality in the Central Delta during drought periods should be important to many of us. A lot of the fresh water and its beneficial use is critical in this region. And during times of drought, you know, if you don't take drastic measures to install the barrier, we run the risk of contaminating all this water. Submitting the certification proactively is kind of our goal. As Jeff mentioned, we currently anticipate submitting our DSC consistency determination sometime during the fall when we have our final EIR. And so that's kind of our current schedule right now. If anything changes, we certainly will loop in the DSC to let them know any project changes. I do want to kind of mention that, you know, we haven't issued our final EIR. So this project, as it's pitched currently, is kind of our thinking of the project right now. Again, we anticipate having our CEQA process completed this fall. And so this project may be tweaked or adjusted based on the comments that we receive. And so we're currently working through that right now. Next slide, please. So just kind of a recap on some of the things we touched on. The proposed project is consistent with the co-equal goals of protecting the Delta ecosystem and ensuring water supply reliability. I think by increasing the resiliency in the Central Delta, it could, it helps protect water quality, aquatic habitat, and water delivery. This strengthens our ability to resist variability and the compounding impacts of severe drought by protecting the beneficial uses of water. And once again, I did mention this before, installing the drought barrier at West Falls River is our best option to adaptively manage the system, considering the dire circumstance. It is a project that, once again, that we don't want to build, but we just want to be proactive and planning for it in the event that we need to do so. So with that, next slide, please. And I think that's it. So maybe we'll just kind of open it up for question and discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, Robert. Appreciate the presentation. We are going to open it up now for comments and questions from the council, and then we'll take public comment. Council, yes, we'll start with Councilmember Lee.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. That was super informative. This may be kind of a basic question. Actually, it's a two-parter, and the first one may inform the second one. If the barrier is so beneficial, it seems like a lot of work to take it in and take it out. So maybe you could explain why we're not proposing to leave it in as a permanent fixture. And then secondly, like I said, your answer may be part of the reason why, but are there other consequences of having it in that you're tracking that we could better understand?
Yeah, so maybe I'll start to your first point. Yeah, so the way we proposed our project is basically based on what we saw in 2015 and 2021. So in 2015, we left the barrier in for 8 months because then we got a break shortly thereafter, and so we ended up taking out the barrier. What we saw during this last drought was when we installed the barrier, it went in 2021. But due to the prolonged drought conditions, we ended up extending it for another year. And so we left the barrier in for essentially 20 months. We went back and forth, to your question of, can we leave the barrier permanently? I think that's a question that obviously there are other impacts associated with leaving the barrier as such, as a permanent fixture. And so our thought was, if we needed to leave the barrier in once again, we would pull it out after that 20-month duration, and our permits would our project would still allow us to go back in there and install it once again if needed. It's one of those things where it's really hard to predict Mother Nature. So we felt like that was kind of the right compromise to try to get a 2 install over a 10-year period.
Thanks, Robert. I see Jacob, I have your hand is up. Did you want to answer?
I just wanted to add to Robert's response.
Yeah, okay.
Robert's right on point with that, but I just would add to that, really to talk about building a permanent type structure here. I mean, that's a whole nother level of planning, design, engineering, and expenses. So, reminding folks that this project's around $20 million. Really looking at something that's permanent, you're up into the, hundreds of millions of dollars range, also in many, many, many years to plan and permit that. So we would not have any possibility of being able to do that quickly. So that's one issue. And then we have questions also whether a permanent structure would be something that's appropriate there. So there's a lot of reasons, but one of the things is, we're not going to be able to respond with a project of that caliber quickly enough so that California is ready to address the next serious drought.
Can you guys talk a little bit more about what other consequences of the barrier that you're tracking?
Yeah, so Julie, maybe I'll let folks chime in as well. I mean, the first 2 that come to mind is one is HABs. During drought, we know that HAB, conditions are poor generally speaking. And so one of the things that we try to be more cognizant of is we put together a more robust program to monitor HABs kind of around the barrier location and also in Frank's Tract. And then we also got some comments related to our 15 install regarding, what the barrier does to fish predation. And so as part of our 21 effort, we did conduct a pretty robust predation study to kind of look at the effects of predation and how it changes with the barrier in place.
And just to add to the HAB issue, as well as the aquatic weed issue, one of the things, we have spent a tremendous amount of money and resources trying to get at these questions. But one thing we're unable to do is differentiate really drought versus drought barrier. So these things all get much worse during a drought. During a drought, with or without barrier, we've seen HABs in Frank's Tract. We also see a frequency of much more aquatic weed, much more problems like that during drought. So it's very difficult for us to untangle the difference between a drought effect and a drought barrier effect, but we have spent substantial resources. We've hired USGS to help us on these efforts. So we are working to get at that.
Is fish migration affected? Sorry, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, is you made me think, is fish migration affected by this also then?
Yes, it is. But the question that we have to ask is it affected in a bad way or a good way? And so we, like Robert said, we did conduct some studies when we deployed the barrier last time. And one of the questions I have is, does it actually impact fisheries or does it help fisheries? And you may think that's kind of a radical concept, but in essence, it's not. And I've talked to USGS and others about that. And that's because this is not a preferred migratory pathway. It's not a preferred migratory pathway for salmonids. It's also not the direction that we want fish like Delta smelt to go. So, there's a theory out there that having this channel blocked off is actually good for salmonids and good for Delta smelt. We don't have enough science to back that up, but that is a hypothesis out there.
Thank you. I'm going to let Dr. Larson, she wanted to also comment on Councilmember Lee's question.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that after the 2015 barrier was installed, the Delta Stewardship Council funded studies through 3 different agreements to study the ecological impacts of the drought barrier. And there is a publication that's authored by Wim Kimmerer and others, including former Delta Science Program staff, which came out in San Francisco Estuary and Watershed Sciences in 2019. But that paper is really a synthesis of what the findings of those studies were. And consistent with what you just heard from Jacob McQuirk, the main adverse finding was an expansion of invasive aquatic weeds within the Frank's Tract. I did see an update on that study when I attended the QEMF meeting last month. And that study was suggesting that when the drought barrier is in place, you get the tidal energy that's redirected over to the north, and it does still enter the Frank's Tract at lower salinity. And there appears to be almost a jet effect where there's a clear pathway that's free of invasive aquatic weeds that's aligned with that tidal energy. But really that expansion of aquatic weeds was noted as the most salient adverse impact. There was some modeling that was done, a particle tracking model that suggested that there might be a slight change in the transport of zooplankton, but again, not highly significant. And then finally, I'll say that trying to evaluate some of these longer term effects through modeling is one of the things that we're trying to catalyze with the salinity management workshop series. So when we have the barrier in place for drought years, and when we look at sequential drought years as opposed to single drought years, what might be some of the consequences that we would expect for transport, for migration of different organisms, and what happens when we add sea level rise on top of that. So some of those studies are in the works as well.
Yeah, so we applaud the DSC for really being engaged on that. And I would just add that we are also engaged on those efforts too. So thank you. Great,
thank you. Next, we'll go to Councilmember Burgess and then Councilmember Moranian.
I'm good. I didn't have questions.
Oh,
first.
Oh. Well, she said, no question, Maria. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, I just was trying to make sure she went first since her hand was up. So I appreciate us going through a more formal process of looking at this and being more proactive. It seems like, you know, with climate change and sea level rise, there's definitely, this isn't an issue that's going to be temporary. It's going to be something that we're dealing with forever, if not, you know, if we can't turn things around. So my first question when I was reading and getting ready for this was, there were probably a lot of fears and concerns when this initially started. And so you know, we've talked about migration and invasive weeds and water quality, and it may be this or it may be that, but were the concerns, the real worries, did we see those things manifest, or were they less because we were able to do some adaptive things? I don't know if this question's very clear, but as someone that's new to this, as far as the process and being involved in the conversation, I know that often the unknown can be very scary and we're all worried about these things. Do we know the impacts on the local economy? Do we know the impacts on, you know, I know we're studying some of the more migratory fish and all of that, but were those fears substantiated?
I can start with that, Robert, and you can just chime in. I think that's a good question. And I think some of the fears, like fears associated with water quality and harmful algal blooms, you know, we've done a lot of studies and we've worked a lot on this, but I think there's still a lot of unknowns there. So that's part of the issue. We did have, you know, a pretty good bloom that occurred. Fortunately, that bloom wasn't toxic. So yes, it looked really bad, but it didn't have the microcystins or the toxicity, which is good. And so we've done a lot of work on that. There have been fears also associated with levees, but what we've done on that is, I'll remind folks, back in 15, the first thing that we did is we really put a big investment into the local levees. So we installed, you know, large seepage berms. We drove sheet piles through the center of the levee. We rocked the levee a few hundred feet in each direction on both sides of the river. And then the other thing we've done is extensive monitoring. So we've really done a lot of bathymetry. And so we've really just tried to track everything and make sure we have a good understanding of how things are changing. So I would say, I don't think the fears have been realized, but there's still also some uncertainties that we're trying to work with. And like I said earlier, also having a better understanding of things like the difference with effects on like aquatic weeds, like Laurel did mention that, you know, that some of the studies are showing the distribution has changed, you know, with that jet coming from the west being shut off. Yeah, some of that area where we saw clearing, you know, you have seen that areas tend to fill in, but, you know, also there's a distribution change. You saw also a lot more flow coming into the north eastern portion of Frank's Tract. So you saw more clearing coming out of that way. So what we definitely see is change. And so, but I would say one thing that we've definitely done better this way around is we really do have a very robust monitoring program, and we put a lot of investment back into trying to understand the effects.
And
that helps a little.
Oh yeah, and with the atmospheric river that we experienced this year, there was a lot of water pretty quick. Were we able to respond in the way that we wanted to the large amount of water that we had to deal with?
Yeah, so the good thing about where this particular barrier is located, it's really in the interior delta. So as far as large storm flows, we don't really see a lot of, you know, changes in water surface elevation or hydrodynamics in this part of the delta, even when you see a big, huge influx of water. I'll remind folks, really the big energy thing that we see in the delta that can cause effects are those king tides. So we'll see more issues associated with king tides really than we do with high delta inflow. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, and then the last thing I was gonna say is we're looking at the impact on the Delta as far as this has there been any studies on the impact on the Bay? You know, because I know it's a whole system that interacts. Is there any?
I don't know of any. I mean, Robert, do you know of any? I mean, I know DWR and cooperation with a lot of other folks and IEP, we do look at all this stuff, but I'm not familiar with studies that were conducted out in the Bay. There was the Wim Kimmer study that looked at some of the stuff in the low salinity zone that happened during the last drought, but I'm not sure. I could get back to you, but I don't know of any work that was done per se in the Bay associated with this.
Yeah, I just think my concern, and I don't know what I don't know, so this isn't judgment. It's just kind of an observation is us humans don't know everything that we're doing when we're modifying things, and so I'm asking questions kind of from both directions on how we're impacting things. Thank you for the presentation.
I appreciate that, Councilmember Burgess. Great point.
Other questions from council? If not, I had a couple of things, and again to Robert and Jacob, thank you for chiming in. There were a couple of things that really caught my attention in the presentation. The comments like, drastic measures, not wanting to build the barrier, the consequences. But I also recognize that this had to go up in 2015 and 2021. And again, recognizing that if we don't put this in, there is a lot at risk. There is huge ramifications at risk. And so I take a look at, the questions that were asked by Councilmember Lee and Councilmember Burgess, and just recognizing, are we going to be doing more monitoring? Are we going to be doing more modeling so that, again, I suspect that this is going to be a continuance, if you will. Who knows, every 4 years, every 5 years, we don't know, right? But are we doing more monitoring, more in-depth monitoring, more in-depth modeling, so that again, when I hear, this should be the last resort measure. We're taking a look at other things that maybe we can use. It sounds like this is the only thing that so far has worked, and it is working, but are we looking at other measures? And then dovetailing on what Councilmember Burgess was also saying, we don't know everything, but are we also planning for what could come as a result of putting the barriers in place, good and bad?
So I think the answer to that question is really yes, we are. And so one of the things that we're doing now that's different from what we've done in the past is we are going through the CEQA process. We're going through the covered action process. So we're going through a lot more planning and more engagement with the public and with agencies and everything else. And so what we're really trying, one of the things we're really trying to do is make it such that we can construct this barrier if we need to control salinity without any sort of an emergency. So it's just something that's a tool that we can bring out if needed. And I would say, yeah, there are other tools we're looking at. There are tools, we did some planning work looking at additional barriers in the North Delta. But the thing to remember even on those is, conditions have to become even worse. And so we're looking at different options we can take to try to address severe drought. I mean, our group really, there's other things the department is doing, but specifically we're looking at the drought barriers. And so these are the options that we're tasked with looking at, as well as looking at the effects of the drought barriers, like you mentioned, both good and bad. And so this is something we're doing. One of the things on the benefits is we're trying to see, well, I mean, how are these benefits realized? Meaning like for a good example I'd like to put out there would be, Contra Costa Water District, or folks that really rely on their municipal supplies from the Delta. Without this barrier, would have it become too salty for some of these municipalities to take water? So these are the types of things that we are looking at. And then we're also looking and you know, we have a lot of work to do still. I'm not going to try to say we don't. And one of the things we are working is looking at hydrodynamic modeling and different efforts to make sure that we've really done a good job of optimizing the potential channel closures. Robert had said in his presentation that we did look at that optimization, but you know what? We think it's prudent to look at that again. And so that's something that we're working up into the queue as well for our modelers and others to look at. Unfortunately, they have very full plates, so we've got to get things into the queue at the right time, but it is definitely something we are looking at. And we're really trying to continue this effort so that we can be in a much better position to respond to severe drought in a non-emergency type way.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jacob. Appreciate that. And so it looks like Laurel, Dr. Larson has her hand up. I think you wanted to respond as well.
Thank you. Yeah, one other thing I wanted to mention is that several teams, including a partnership between DWR, the Stewardship Council, State Parks, and UC Davis, have looked at nature-based solutions to also redirect salinity away from the Franks Tract and the Central Delta, and through a collaborative planning process that was known as the Franks Tract Futures process, which was led by Dr. Brett Milligan at UC Davis. Communities came together and came up with a design for wetland restoration in that northwest part of Franks Tract that the models suggested would also be very effective at directing salinity away from this part of the Delta. Now, one of the things we're interested in exploring with the modeling that we're doing with the Salinity Management Workshop Series is whether investment in that type of restoration is something that could change the frequency with which we might need to install a drought barrier. So I wanted to put that out there as something else that could potentially be very effective during dry years. I'm not sure if I could speak to its efficacy relative to the barrier during extreme drought. I think it's probably not as good, but perhaps having that in place could change the frequency with which a drought barrier would be needed.
Dr. Larson, I'm very glad you brought that up. And so really, you know, nature-based solutions like the restoration of Franks Tract are an option. It's something that, you know, could happen. We have done a lot of modeling looking at that. And you know, I don't know, one of our modelers that a lot of folks may work with is Dr. Akalovich. And so we worked a lot with Eli. And so one of the things he likes to talk about with Franks Tract Futures, and we're a proponent of it, I'll talk a little bit about the drawback in 1 second, is that it works every day. And so you're getting some salinity management benefit with restoring Franks Tract day in and day out. So it's not something that we have to put in to get benefits. And then looking at some of the latest designs we looked at for the restoration of Franks Tract, we also were talking about, in the event of really severe drought, you could do very small channel closures within Franks Tract and then incur the same level of benefits we would from the False River closure. So we do see it as a real win, also a win for the environment. But unfortunately, I'm going to tell everybody what the drawback is. And the drawback is really just, how are we going to fund this? This is a over $1 billion project. And I just don't see, unless we can somehow, so this is really the charge for everybody. How are we going to get the federal government to loosen up their purse strings and try to put an investment in on something like Franks Tract? Because it is a good project, but it's $1 billion project.
Jacob, thank you for that. Yeah, it just opens up a ton of other questions for me that we need to consider and ponder for the future. But again, Laurel, thank you for that update. Yeah, anything with regard to this and nature-based solutions and looking at, you know, again, that you're convening and having these convenes, I think are super important. Yes, Councilmember Maranian.
No, I'm good. I think I should lower my.
Oh, you got to lower. Okay. If there are no other questions or comments, we will now move on to public comment. Beck, is there any public comment on this item?
No, Madam Chair, there is not.
Excellent. Well, thank you again to our allies, friends, colleagues over at DWR for that great presentation, great follow-up. And we didn't get to hear Abraham, but nice to meet you, Abraham. And thank you for joining us. If nothing else, we will move on to our last item, and that is preparation for our next council meeting. But I will have one direct, if it's okay. I just wanted to alert all of you, or notice all of you, or inform all of you. If you haven't seen it, there is a blog on the Delta Stewardship Council website, and it's titled "How We Can All Be Guardians of the Delta," what we heard at our tribal listening session. And so I would love for you all to listen to that. It's co-authored by myself and our tribal liaison, Brandon Chapin. And so hopefully you guys have an opportunity to listen to this blog, my first blog as a chair of the Delta Stewardship Council. And I think it's quite informative. Again, our next council meeting will be taking place on June 23rd, 24th at the CNRA building, 715 Peace Street in Sacramento. And of course, we will always notice that 10 days before our meeting. I want to thank everybody who participated in today's meeting. I wish you all safe travels on a very heavy trafficked and busy holiday weekend. Stay safe, be safe, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. So with that, thank you. And we will now adjourn this meeting. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.